Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain fell in sheets, a constant drumbeat against the forest canopy above. Each drop splattered on the leaves, thickening the air with a musty scent of wet earth. The narrow trail wound deeper into the dense woods, the path barely visible through the shadows of towering trees. Their gnarled branches twisted overhead like reaching fingers, filtering what little light remained from the overcast sky. Eli couldn't remember when he'd first noticed the change in the weather. It had started as a light drizzle, hardly worth noticing, but now the storm was in full force. His boots sank into the soft ground with every step, the mud clinging to his feet as though the forest itself wanted to keep him here. But there was no turning back now. The lodge was just ahead. He had been invited to spend the weekend in the secluded cabin by an old friend, someone he hadn't seen in years. The invitation had been a surprise, an unexpected message, a cryptic tone. "You need a break. Come join me in the woods. There's something you need to see." The mention of the lodge piqued his curiosity. A chance to escape the noise of the city sounded appealing, especially with everything that had been weighing on him lately. The promise of solitude, of quiet, was enough to convince him. But now, standing on the edge of the forest, he was beginning to feel uneasy. The path opened into a clearing, revealing the lodge in the distance. The structure loomed through the mist like a forgotten monument, its stone walls covered in creeping vines, windows dark and empty. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, twisting into the sky like the fingers of some unseen hand. Eli took a deep breath, shaking off the sense of dread that had been creeping up on him since he'd left the main road. He had been looking forward to this, hadn't he? But as he stepped closer to the lodge, the forest behind him seemed to grow darker, its shadows stretching longer. The trees whispered in the wind, their rustling sounds almost like soft voices. It was as though the woods were watching him. With a final, reluctant glance over his shoulder, Eli reached the porch of the lodge. He knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness of the forest. No answer. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. Eli pushed the door open, its hinges creaking in protest. The inside of the lodge was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of the fire from the hearth casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something else, something musty like damp leather. He stood in the doorway for a moment, hesitating, feeling a sudden coldness that wasn't just from the rain outside. "Hello?" he called, his voice carrying through the silence, but it only echoed back to him. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, leaving him in near-complete darkness save for the flickering firelight. His eyes adjusted, scanning the room. The lodge was large, with high ceilings and thick wooden beams crisscrossing above. There were leather chairs arranged around the fire, a heavy oak table in the center, and shelves lined with old books and knickknacks, most of which looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The stone walls of the lodge were adorned with old, faded tapestries, their colors muted by time, but still managing to evoke strange, eerie images. Figures in the woods, staring eyes, strange symbols etched into trees. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Even the large fireplace seemed to have been abandoned for some time, the logs within it charred and forgotten, waiting for someone to rekindle them. Eli stepped further into the room, the sound of his boots muffled by the worn carpet. He made his way toward the fire, the warmth of the flames soothing against the cold that had seeped into his bones. There was something oddly comforting about it, despite the sense of unease that settled deeper within him. A noise echoed from somewhere deeper within the lodge, a soft creak, like a door shifting on its hinges. Eli froze, his hand tightening around the strap of his bag. He wasn't sure if it was the wind or something else entirely. The lodge was too quiet, too still. It felt abandoned. "James?" he called out again, a bit louder this time, trying to shake off the discomfort that clung to him like a second skin. Still no answer. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, causing the rain to pound against the glass like an urgent knock. The storm outside was getting worse, and the sound of the wind, mixed with the steady hiss of rain, made the lodge feel even more isolated, as if the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving him here alone in the dark. Eli's fingers brushed against the stone wall as he moved to explore, seeking something, anything, to explain the unsettling silence. He stepped toward the hallway at the far end of the room, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The fire behind him flickered once more, casting a brief shadow that seemed to twitch and warp unnaturally, like it was stretching out toward him. The hall was narrow, its walls adorned with old, cracked portraits, faces long faded with age. Their eyes seemed to follow him, an unsettling presence in the dim light. He could feel their gazes as he passed them, like the weight of their attention was pressing on his chest. It was as though the lodge was more than just a building. It was something alive, breathing in the rain, watching him. At the end of the hallway, a staircase ascended into the gloom above. The wooden banister was thick with dust, and a single dim light flickered weakly from the ceiling. The stairs themselves seemed almost too steep, too narrow, as though they were meant to discourage anyone from climbing. A sudden, sharp noise from upstairs made Eli freeze. It sounded like something, or someone, moving. He swallowed hard, stepping back toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. But just as his fingers brushed against the handle, another noise came from upstairs. It was more distinct this time, unmistakable footsteps. And then a voice, soft, almost too faint to hear, but unmistakable. "You shouldn't be here." Eli's heart stopped. The voice was low, raspy, as if it came from the very walls themselves. He could feel the weight of it press against him, the coldness of it sinking deep into his bones. He spun around, his breath shallow, searching the room as though expecting someone to materialize out of the shadows. But there was no one. The lodge was still. The voice came again, this time clearer, sharper. "You shouldn't be here, not now, not ever." The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the fire flickering as if struggling to stay alive. Eli turned, his eyes darting to the staircase. He could hear movement above him now, slow, deliberate, like something was dragging itself across the floor. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Eli rushed for the door, but before he could reach it, the voice echoed again, closer this time, coming from behind him. "You can't leave." Eli's breath caught in his throat. He whirled around, heart racing, but the room remained empty, still as a tomb. There was no way out. And yet, something told him he wasn't alone. Eli stood frozen, his eyes darting around the room as the oppressive silence swallowed him whole. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, crawling across the walls and floor like dark tendrils, eager to pull him deeper into their grasp. His hand, still resting on the door handle, shook with the cold, but it wasn't the chill of the storm outside. This cold felt wrong, unnatural, as though the very air around him had been tainted. He took a step back, his boots scraping against the old floorboards. The fire crackled behind him, its warmth a fleeting comfort in the face of the mounting dread that gnawed at his senses. There was something here, something ancient and malevolent. Something that didn't want him to leave. His gaze flicked toward the staircase again. The footsteps from above had stopped. The voice, low and rasping, had fallen silent. But the air was thick with tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. A flash of movement caught his eye. At the edge of the hallway, where the shadows were deepest, something shifted. A figure. A shape, just barely visible in the flickering light of the fire. Eli blinked, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment he thought he had imagined it. But no, there it was again, moving with slow, deliberate steps toward him. It wasn't a person. It was something darker. A shadow that stretched too long, too wide, as if it didn't belong in the physical world at all. It seemed to be crawling along the wall, its form jagged and distorted, shifting like smoke, but with an undeniable presence. Eli's breath hitched. He took a step backward, his mind screaming at him to run, to leave, but his legs felt like lead. The shadow moved toward him with unnatural speed, closing the gap between them in a heartbeat. It was as though the darkness itself had come alive. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the thin air, swallowed by the night. The hall was empty again, the strange figure gone. Eli stood there, trembling, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just seen. He had to get out. He had to leave this place. But before he could act, another sound broke the silence, a soft, almost imperceptible creak. Then a door opened upstairs with a slow, grinding motion, as though it had been locked for years. The sound echoed through the lodge, unsettling in its finality. He couldn't stay here any longer. Eli bolted for the door, his hand grasping the handle desperately, but as he tried to twist it, the door wouldn't budge. His panic surged. He yanked at the door with all his strength, but it refused to open. "Please," he muttered to himself, breathless. "Let me out." The voice from earlier, that deep, rasping whisper, returned again, this time right behind him. "You can't leave. You were never meant to leave." The words crawled down his spine, like ice spreading through his veins. His body froze, heart pounding. He turned slowly, his eyes wide with fear. There, standing in the shadow of the hallway, was a figure. It was tall, too tall, its features barely visible in the dim light. But its presence was undeniable, an oppressive weight in the room, suffocating in its stillness. The figure was cloaked in darkness, its outline shifting and twisting, as if the shadow itself was alive. Its eyes, two pinpricks of cold light, stared at him unblinking. They were too bright, too intense, burning through the darkness like twin stars. But there was no warmth in them, only emptiness and hunger. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He took a step back and the figure followed, its movement smooth and fluid like it was gliding across the floor. "You shouldn't have come," the figure murmured, its voice now echoing in Eli's mind, more forceful, more insistent. "This is our home. And now, so are you." Eli stumbled back, desperate to get away, but his legs refused to obey. The air around him thickened, pressing in on him from all sides. The lodge was alive, its walls closing in. The firelight flickered once more, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own, pulling at his feet, trying to drag him into the darkness. "You can't leave," the voice whispered again, this time louder, reverberating through the room. "Not after what you've seen." His heart pounded painfully in his chest as the figure took another step forward, its eyes glowing brighter with each movement. Eli's mind screamed for him to run, but his body wouldn't listen. His feet felt as though they were glued to the floor. The door, the window, anything. There had to be a way out. But then, as though the very air had been stolen from his lungs, a low, guttural growl rose from the shadows, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. The fire in the hearth sputtered and died, leaving the room in complete darkness, save for the two glowing eyes that burned into his soul. Something shifted in the blackness. And then, without warning, the voice spoke again, this time with a promise. No longer a whisper, but a commanding force. "You are ours now." Eli's vision blurred. His head spun as the walls seemed to close in around him. He was being drawn into the shadows, pulled by some unseen force. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, everything went black. When Eli opened his eyes again, it was as though he had never truly left the darkness. The world around him was thick and suffocating, like being submerged beneath the surface of a cold, stagnant lake. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest tight as if something heavy was pressing down on him. But it wasn't just his body that felt weighed down, his very soul felt anchored in place. The cold was unbearable. It wasn't the kind of chill you'd feel from a winter storm, but something ancient, something far older than the forest outside the lodge. It permeated the air, the walls, the very fabric of reality itself. He couldn't see, couldn't move, but he could feel it, the oppressive weight of something watching him. The same presence that had filled the lodge. His head was spinning, his mouth dry, his limbs stiff. The darkness surrounding him wasn't the comforting black of night. It was something far more insidious, something unnatural, and it was closing in on him. The whispering started again. At first, it was just a distant murmur, like the wind rustling through the trees. But then it grew louder, closer, until it was all he could hear. It sounded like dozens of voices, all speaking in a language he couldn't understand, a language that felt wrong. He tried to move, but his limbs wouldn't obey. Panic surged within him, his heart hammering in his chest, but it felt as if the air itself was holding him in place. The more he struggled, the more the pressure around him increased. And then he heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing through the darkness. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. The same figure from before, the shadow in the hallway, had returned. He couldn't see it, but he could feel its presence, the very air around him distorting as it drew closer. It was closer than ever, its cold, glowing eyes boring into him from all sides. "You are awake," the voice whispered, its tone now thick with malice. "Good. The game can begin." A shiver ran down Eli's spine. He had no idea where he was. The lodge was gone, the forest was gone, he was somewhere else, somewhere far darker. The only thing that remained was the voice and the endless void. His pulse raced as he finally managed to move his fingers. They twitched, then clenched into a fist. He pushed against the weight that held him down, his arms trembling with the effort. Slowly, painfully, he managed to sit up. The room, or whatever this was still pitch black. But as he looked around, a soft, eerie glow began to emerge from the edges of the darkness. A shape materialized, standing in the distance. A shadow within shadows, a twisted figure moving towards him. Eli's heart skipped a beat. His instincts screamed at him to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The room, if it could even be called that, was endless, an infinite abyss of inky blackness, and that shape was drawing closer. As the figure approached, the glow from its eyes brightened, the oppressive darkness retreating like mist in the wake of a storm. It was taller than he remembered, towering over him with an unnatural grace. The darkness that clung to it seemed to ripple like water, undulating as it moved. "You thought you could leave," The voice hissed, now more distinct, more human, but still carrying that unsettling quality. But the forest, it never lets go. Eli opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat felt dry tight. Every breath was like inhaling shards of ice. The figure knelt before him, its face coming into the dim light. It was no longer the faceless shadow he had seen before. No, this thing had a face, twisted and grotesque, a mask of tortured flesh and empty eyes. Its mouth was a wide, jagged slit, filled with rows of sharp teeth, glistening with a hunger that went beyond anything Eli could understand. "You came here," it said, its voice now a rasping growl, "because you were meant to." The words didn't make sense, but the feeling they evoked was unmistakable. A creeping sense of inevitability, like everything in his life had led him to this moment, this place. As if the forest had always known he would come. "You have seen us," the creature continued. "You have walked our paths. Now you belong to the lodge. And we will never let you leave." Eli's body trembled, his mind reeling. The lodge? What was it talking about? His memories felt distant, fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered and lost to time. Suddenly, the darkness around him twisted, bending and reshaping like it had a life of its own. Shadows lashed out, creeping along the walls, crawling up his legs, wrapping around his arms. The cold seeped deeper into his skin, and his vision blurred. He could hear the forest now, the soft, distant rustle of leaves, the chirping of unseen creatures. But it wasn't the comforting sound of nature. No, it was the sound of the woods calling to him, beckoning him deeper into its tangled embrace. The figure loomed closer, its eyes narrowing. "You should not have come," it whispered, "but you will never leave. Not now. Not ever." And as the last of his strength drained away, as the darkness closed in and the cold consumed him, Eli realized the truth. He had been trapped long before he stepped foot in the lodge. The forest had known him, had waited for him. And now it would claim him. With a final, strangled gasp, Eli surrendered to the darkness. The darkness didn't swallow him all at once. It was slow, like sinking into a deep pool, where every part of his body was drawn downward, helpless against the pull of an unseen force. The last thing Eli felt before everything went black was the sharp sting of cold on his skin. Cold that wasn't just from the absence of warmth, but from something else entirely, something that chilled him from the inside out. And then, just like that, the coldness began to recede. Slowly, gradually, as though he were being pulled out of an abyss, his senses flooding back in a rush. But the darkness still clung to him. It was there, just out of reach, like the edge of a dream he couldn't quite grasp. Eli's eyes fluttered open again, but this time, it wasn't the same lodge that surrounded him. No, this place was different. The air was thick, heavy with a damp, earthy smell, and the ground beneath him felt soft, almost spongy, like wet moss. The scent of decay lingered in the air, mingling with the distant scent of pine and wet leaves. He blinked and the world came into focus. He was no longer in the lodge. Instead, Eli found himself lying on his back, surrounded by towering trees that stretched up into the darkness above. The canopy was thick, the branches twisting and gnarled, their roots tangled deep within the earth. The forest was ancient, unnaturally so. It felt older than time itself. And despite the eerie quiet that blanketed the area, there was something alive here, watching him, waiting. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, his legs unsteady, his body stiff as though he'd been lying there for hours, maybe longer. He wiped his forehead, but his skin was slick with a cold sweat. The forest around him felt oppressive, like it was closing in with every breath he took, as if the very trees were leaning in to listen to his every movement. The rain was still falling. It pattered against the leaves above, but the dense canopy offered little shelter, so the droplets fell in thick sheets, soaking his clothes through. Eli felt it against his skin, the weight of the rain mixing with the cold of the air, but it was nothing compared to the chill of the ground beneath his feet. The earth felt wrong here, like it was breathing, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "Where am I?" he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. No answer came. He staggered forward, his eyes scanning the area for some sign of familiar surroundings, but all he saw was the endless forest stretching out in every direction. The trees were unnaturally tall, their trunks dark with age and shrouded in thick vines. The underbrush was dense, twisted, and nearly impenetrable, leaving only narrow paths that wound deeper into the heart of the woods. And then he saw it. A figure standing just within the shadow of the trees. Eli's breath caught in his throat. At first, he thought it was another of the twisted shadows he had encountered in the lodge, another figure that was nothing more than an apparition. But no, This one was solid, real, and watching him intently. The figure was tall, cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath the hood of a heavy cloak. But there was something wrong about it. It didn't move. It didn't even seem to breathe. He just stood there staring. Eli's heart hammered in his chest as he instinctively stepped back, the weight of the figure's gaze pressing on him like a physical force. The air seemed to thicken, and the trees around him groaned, their branches creaking as if in warning. "Who are you?" Eli called out, trying to keep his voice steady, but it trembled despite his best efforts. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there watching him, unmoving like a stone statue. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, rustling the leaves and sending a chill up his spine. The figure's head tilted slightly as if considering him, before it slowly raised a hand and pointed deeper into the forest. Eli froze. The gesture was deliberate. He could feel it. The air seemed to vibrate with some unseen force, urging him to follow the silent command. Against every instinct in his body, Eli found himself taking a step forward. The figure remained motionless, still pointing toward the heart of the forest. His heart pounded in his chest, but his feet moved as though they had a mind of their own, carrying him deeper into the woods. The further he walked, the darker the forest became. The trees closed in on him, their twisted branches blocking out what little light remained from the overcast sky. The ground was uneven, slick with rain and mud, making each step treacherous. The forest itself felt like it was alive, watching him, listening to every breath he took. The air grew colder as he ventured deeper. Every sound seemed amplified, the distant drip of water, the rustling of leaves, the creaking of the trees. It was almost as if the forest was breathing with him, in rhythm, drawing him further into its depths. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it now. Something was pulling at him, urging him forward. He couldn't ignore it, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. He was drawn to the deep darkness ahead, to the place where the trees seemed to swallow all light. Minutes, or was it hours, passed as he trudged through the forest, the rain never ceasing. His clothes were soaked, his muscles aching, but he couldn't stop. Something was waiting for him. He didn't know what it was, but he felt its presence as sure as he felt the rain against his skin. And then he saw it. At the end of the narrow trail, there was a clearing. The trees broke apart, revealing an old, crumbling structure that seemed out of place in this forsaken wilderness. It was a lodge, a massive, decaying building, its stone walls covered in thick vines, its windows dark and lifeless. The door was ajar, a faint light flickering inside. The feeling in Eli's chest grew heavier, the pull in his gut stronger. This was where he was meant to be. He stepped forward, each footfall dragging him closer to the threshold, the door creaking open as if inviting him inside. And then, as his hand brushed against the door frame, a voice echoed in his mind, deep and resonant. "Welcome back, Eli. We've been waiting for you." The door creaked open with a sound that sent a shiver down Eli's spine. The darkness inside the lodge was thick, swallowing the faint light of the forest, making it difficult to discern anything beyond the threshold. But the faint flicker of something warm, a fire perhaps, pulsed from within, beckoning him forward. Every instinct screamed for him to turn around, to leave the place, but the pull, the oppressive force surrounding him, was too strong. It was like the forest, the very earth beneath him, was urging him to step inside, to surrender to whatever fate awaited him. He took a tentative step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The sound of the rain outside seemed distant now, muted by the heavy walls of the lodge. As he passed through the doorway, the air shifted, thick with a musty, ancient smell, a mixture of decayed wood, mildew, and something else, something sharper, metallic. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that sent a jolt of panic through his chest. He spun around, his pulse racing, but there was nothing. The lodge stood silent, the heavy stone walls looming over him, their surface worn with age and neglect. The fire in the hearth crackled and hissed, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. The flames were oddly bright, far more vivid than they should have been given the lack of other light sources. The warmth they offered felt almost too much, an overwhelming heat that contrasted sharply with the cold, damp air he had carried in from the forest. It made his skin prickle uncomfortably. Eli's eyes scanned the room, looking for something, anything, that could explain this place, this bizarre, suffocating atmosphere. The walls were lined with shelves, but the shelves were filled with odd, ancient-looking objects. Twisted figures carved from dark wood, dusty glass bottles filled with strange liquids, and thick leather-bound books whose pages looked as though they had never been turned in centuries. At the far end of the room, opposite the fireplace, there was a large, ornate mirror. Its frame was tarnished and warped, but the glass, while slightly cloudy, still reflected the room. but the reflection didn't match the room he stood in. Eli's breath caught in his throat. In the mirror, the room looked different, darker. The fire in the hearth was barely aglow, the flames reduced to smoldering embers. The shelves were empty, save for a few scattered, broken objects. And in the far corner, a shadowy figure stood, tall and unmoving, watching him with eyes that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Eli's stomach lurched. He spun around, his heart hammering, but there was no one in the corner of the room. Just the empty space. Just the echoes of the forest creeping inside. He took a step forward, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch the mirror's surface. The glass was cool, smooth, but the moment his fingers made contact, the air around him seemed to shift. The warmth of the fire flickered and dimmed, and the shadows in the corners of the room grew deeper, stretching longer, like they were reaching out toward him. A voice echoed softly in the room, low, distant, like a whisper carried on the wind. It wasn't the voice of the figure from the forest. No, this was different. The words seemed to press against his chest, too close to ignore. Step closer and see. Eli's eyes widened. He couldn't resist. He had to know. There was something drawing him to the mirror, some unseen force pushing him toward it. He took another step, and the shadows around him seemed to move, swirling in time with his every movement. They reached for his ankles, his legs, their long, dark fingers pulling at him. His breath caught in his throat as he staggered toward the mirror, but despite the unease gnawing at him, he couldn't stop. He leaned forward, his face close to the glass, his reflection staring back at him with hollow eyes. But there was something different about his reflection. The man in the mirror wasn't him, not in the way he looked now at least. In the reflection, his clothes were torn and stained, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. His body looked like it had been through something brutal, something horrific. And his reflection, his other self, was staring at him with a gaze that sent a cold shiver down his spine. The figure in the mirror slowly raised a hand, its fingers pale and trembling, and pointed directly at Eli's chest. The action was slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. "You are already here," the voice in his mind said, its tone thick and rasping, as if emerging from the very bowels of the lodge. "You have always been here." The words hit him like a physical blow. His heart hammered painfully against his ribs as his reflection grinned, just a twitch of a smile, sharp and unnerving. But it wasn't his smile. It was twisted, stretched, like the face in the mirror didn't belong to him anymore. Suddenly, the fire in the hearth flared, its flames licking up toward the ceiling. Eli staggered back, gasping for air as the heat increased, the fire roaring to life as though it had a mind of its own. The room around him began to shift again, the walls warping, the shadows stretching and pulling as if the lodge itself was alive. He felt something cold against the back of his neck. The sensation crawled down his spine like fingers made of ice, sending a jolt of terror through him. He spun around, but there was no one there. The door had reappeared, its surface warped and cracked, but it was slightly ajar, just enough for him to see a shadow flicker in the hallway beyond. It was there. It was waiting for him. The voice returned, louder now, resonating in his skull, rattling the bones in his ears. "You cannot escape." Eli's knees buckled. His body felt as though it was being pulled into the floor itself, his feet heavy and rooted to the ground. His arms trembled, his vision blurred. The room seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, the walls closing in, the fire surging higher and higher, threatening to consume everything. And then, just as quickly as it had all started, everything stopped. The fire dimmed to nothing but embers. The shadows shrank back, vanishing like they were never there. The air felt still, too still, as if the lodge itself was holding its breath. But Eli knew deep down that whatever force had brought him here was far from finished. And as the mirror reflected the darkness in the corner of the room, his pulse raced. He wasn't alone. Eli's breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling sharply as the oppressive silence of the lodge settled in around him. The fire in the hearth had died to a low, ashen glow, the embers casting faint orange light across the room. The shadows, though, remained thick, too thick. They clung to the corners, creeping along the walls like a second skin, watching him, waiting. He stood frozen, unable to shake the feeling that he was no longer in control of his movements. His feet felt as if they were stuck in place, heavy with the weight of something unseen, something that wanted to keep him here. The lodge had become more than just a building. It had become a living entity, suffocating him, drawing him into its dark heart. The voice was gone, for now at least, but the silence it left behind was just as suffocating. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic tapping of the rain against the windows, a quiet reminder of the storm still raging outside. And even that sound, once comforting, now felt distant, as though the world outside the lodge had ceased to exist. Eli forced his legs to move, taking slow, cautious steps away from the mirror. His reflection no longer grinned at him from the glass, but he could still feel its eyes on him. Those hollow, empty eyes that had stared into his soul. He moved toward the hallway, his feet dragging as though the very air was heavier here, denser. The door, which had appeared out of nowhere, still stood ajar. Eli didn't want to go through it. He didn't want to step into the dark hallway beyond. But some force, some whisper deep within him, told him he had no choice. The corridor was narrow, the walls closing in around him as he stepped forward. The wood beneath his feet creaked with each movement, echoing too loudly in the otherwise silent lodge. His hand brushed against the walls as he passed, feeling the rough texture of the old, decaying wood. The floor was slick with something, mud, moisture, or worse, but he couldn't focus on it. His mind was elsewhere, his thoughts tangled in the fog of fear and confusion. As he walked, the temperature seemed to drop even further, the chill seeping into his bones. It was as if the walls themselves had become colder, as though the lodge was feeding on his fear, growing stronger with each step he took. His breath came in misty clouds as he walked, the cold nipping at his skin. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead of him, the darkness creeping closer with every step. The walls seemed to shift, warping and bending as though the space itself was alive, pulsing with some hidden, malevolent force. He could hear faint whispers, distant at first, barely audible, like voices carried on the wind. But there was no wind. There was no breeze. It was the lodge itself speaking, calling to him. "You cannot escape," a voice whispered, its tone barely more than a breath. Eli froze, his heart racing. The voice was familiar. It was the same one from before, the one that had spoken in the mirror in his mind. But now it felt closer, as though the voice had slipped from the air itself and taken root in the very walls around him. "We are always with you," it continued, the words dripping with malice, echoing in his mind. "You were always meant to be here, Eli. The forest called to you. You heard its song." Eli shook his head, trying to block out the words. He didn't want to hear them. He didn't want to know what they meant. But it was as if the lodge was speaking directly to his soul, dragging him deeper into its depths with every syllable. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just in his head anymore. They surrounded him, bouncing off the walls, reverberating in the space around him. They were inside him now, inside his thoughts. "We are the ones who have waited. We are the ones who have seen you." His feet moved of their own accord, carrying him deeper into the heart of the lodge. His hands trembled as they brushed against the walls, the rough wood feeling slick and soft beneath his touch. The hallway stretched on forever, and yet the sense of time had become distorted, as though it no longer mattered. Nothing mattered here but the whispers, the forest, the lodge. The air thickened as he walked, becoming heavier, denser with each passing second. It was like he was walking through a dream, a nightmare, and every step was a step deeper into that nightmare. Suddenly the whispers stopped. A heavy silence fell over the corridor, thick and suffocating. Eli's footsteps were the only sound now, the echo of his movement stretching out before him. The darkness pressed in from all sides, the shadows now seeming to writhe and twist around him, crawling up the walls like insects. Ahead, the hallway opened into a vast chamber. The air grew colder still as he approached, and he could feel the heavy weight of something in the center of the room, something ancient and powerful. As he stepped into the chamber, his eyes immediately fell on the center of the room, a massive stone altar, dark and foreboding. It was covered in strange symbols, jagged lines etched into the stone, like ancient runes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Eli's heart sank as he looked around the chamber. The walls were covered in the same twisted, ancient symbols, their edges worn and faded with age, but still somehow glowing faintly as though they were alive. And beneath them, the floor was covered in something dark and sticky like old blood. At the far end of the room, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. A silhouette standing motionless, its back to him, the outline of a person, but somehow wrong. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs stretching unnaturally long, and the shape of its head, there was something grotesque about it. It wasn't human. "Welcome, Eli." The voice came again, this time from the figure. It was low, guttural, and so full of malice that it sent a shudder down Eli's spine. The figure didn't move. It just stood there waiting, watching. Eli tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His chest tightened, his throat closing as though the very air around him was squeezing the life from his lungs. The figure turned slowly, its movements deliberate, its face hidden beneath a hooded cloak. but the shadows around it seemed to move, twisting and shifting in ways they shouldn't. Eli could feel them reaching for him, crawling up his arms, his legs pulling him toward the altar. "You're home now," the figure said. The words were like ice. "And this is where you will remain." Eli tried to move, to run, but the shadows had already wrapped themselves around him, pulling him closer to the altar, to whatever fate awaited him there. The shadows tightened their grip around Eli, pulling him closer to the altar, their tendrils like cold fingers curling around his legs, his arms binding him in place. He tried to resist, to break free, but the darkness was too strong, too insistent. It was as if the very air in the chamber had turned to thick, suffocating smoke, wrapping around him and holding him in place, like some terrible creature's jaws. His breath quickened, his heart pounding against his chest, but no matter how hard he struggled, the shadows wouldn't let go. They weren't just physical. They weren't just part of the room. No, they were alive. A living thing crawling up his skin, twisting through his veins, making his bones ache with their coldness. His body felt heavy, his movements sluggish as he was dragged toward the stone altar, its surface slick with the same dark substance that stained the floor. The symbols etched into the altar pulsed with a sickly, dim light, each one throbbing like a heartbeat, but it wasn't a heartbeat of life. It was the heartbeat of something ancient and hungry. As Eli was pulled closer to the altar, he could hear the whispers again, faint at first like the sound of wind through the trees, but growing louder, more distinct with each passing second. They were all around him now, pressing into his mind, their voices jumbled and overlapping. "You are not the first," one voice said, its tone deep and resonant. "Nor will you be the last. The forest has claimed you," another voice hissed, the words like acid. "You are one of us now." Eli's mind reeled, the words drowning him in their suffocating weight. His body was frozen, unable to move, trapped in the darkness as the figure standing at the far end of the chamber began to approach. It moved slowly, deliberately, its limbs stretching impossibly long, like they were bending the laws of reality itself. The shadows around it writhed, feeding on the very air, hungry, desperate. Eli's throat tightened. He had to do something. Anything. But the shadows held him fast, forcing him to his knees before the altar. His face was inches from the stone, the symbols beneath him pulsating with an unsettling rhythm. The air was so thick with fear and despair that it tasted metallic on his tongue. He wanted to scream, to fight, but no sound escaped him. The figure reached the altar, its face still hidden beneath the hood of its cloak. It loomed over him, its presence heavy and oppressive, filling the room with an unspoken terror. "You felt it, haven't you?" the figure's voice echoed, its tone like a low growl, a rasping breath from a deep cavern. The voice was familiar, but in a way that made his skin crawl, as though it had been stitched together from the whispers of 1,000 lost souls. Eli's gaze lifted, his eyes locking onto the figure's form, and for the first time he saw it fully. The figure wasn't human, it couldn't be. Its body was a twisted blend of flesh and shadow, its limbs unnaturally long, stretching out like an insect's legs, while its face remained hidden beneath the hood. But there was something in its posture, something that made it feel alive, too aware. "You were brought here for a reason," the figure continued, its voice dripping with malice. "The forest chose you. The lodge chose you. And now, you will join us." The shadows around Eli pulsed, tightening their grip, pressing in on him until his chest felt like it might cave in. His pulse raced, his blood pounding in his ears as the figure slowly reached down, its hand emerging from the folds of its cloak. The hand was gaunt, with fingers that were too long, too thin, like claws scraping against the air. Eli's stomach churned. There was no escape. There was no way out of this place, this nightmare. His eyes filled with tears as the figure's fingers brushed his forehead, cold and sharp as ice. The touch sent a jolt through his body, a searing pain that made his skin burn and his chest tighten as if a vice had been clamped around his heart. "This is where the path ends for you, Eli," the figure whispered, its voice filling his mind. "And where the new path begins." With a slow, deliberate motion, the figure pressed its hand against his chest, right over his heart. The pressure was immense, like the weight of the entire forest was resting on him. His ribs creaked under the force and he gasped for breath, his body spasming as if it were being crushed from the inside out. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything stopped. The pressure vanished. The darkness that had suffocated him receded, leaving only an eerie stillness in its wake. Eli gasped, sucking in a deep, desperate breath as the shadows fell away from him, their cold tendrils loosening their grip. His hands trembled as he reached up, feeling his chest. There was no pain, no lingering sensation of pressure. He was free. But the figure was still there. The shadows, now gathered in thick clouds around the figure's feet, swirled and churned like a storm, an energy thrumming in the air, heavy and electric. The figure, still hooded and obscured, stood silent for a moment, its presence overwhelming, as though it were drawing all the strength from the room, feeding on it. Then, without warning, it raised its hands. The shadows responded immediately, coiling around its limbs like serpents, pulling together into a massive, swirling mass of darkness. It was as though the very air itself had turned into liquid, swirling around Eli, binding him once more, tightening around him like chains of pure night. "You were given a chance to escape," the figure intoned, its voice colder now, more insistent. "But you will never leave. Not again." The shadows reached out to encircle his body, sinking into his skin, filling his veins with cold, suffocating darkness. Eli's vision blurred as his body began to tremble uncontrollably, his limbs shaking as though they were no longer his own. The forest had claimed him. The lodge had claimed him. And now the darkness would claim his soul. He gasped for air, his chest constricting, and in that moment, as the shadows pulled him deeper into their grasp, he understood the terrible truth. The lodge wasn't just a place. It wasn't just an ancient structure built by men. It was a living thing, a hungry creature that fed on the souls of those who entered it, a prison from which there was no escape. And now Eli was part of it. The shadows closed in around him, swallowing him whole. Eli's body trembled as the shadows wrapped around him, pulling him deeper into their cold embrace. The weight of them was unbearable, like 1,000 invisible hands squeezing the life out of him, until he could barely draw breath. His thoughts spun in a whirl of confusion, fear, and something far worse, a deep, gnawing understanding that he had entered a realm from which there was no return. His vision blurred, the darkness closing in as his senses dulled. He could feel the chill of the shadows seeping into his very bones, draining him of warmth, of life. The pain in his chest had gone beyond physical. It was something primal, something that rattled his soul. His heart beat slower, weaker with each passing second, as though it too was being swallowed by the abyss that had taken hold of him. But then, amidst the overwhelming darkness, a flicker of light pierced through the void. At first, it was nothing more than a faint glow, like a distant star twinkling at the edge of his vision. But it grew brighter, slowly expanding, until it filled the space around him with a soft, golden light. The shadows recoiled from the light, hissing as if they were being burned by its mere presence. Eli's breath caught in his throat. This light, it felt familiar. It felt like warmth, like the sun breaking through the darkest storm. He reached out toward it, his hand trembling as it moved through the black void. His fingers brushed against something solid, a surface, a barrier. He pulled himself toward it, his body still bound by the shadows but somehow urged forward by the light. The pain in his chest eased just slightly, and he felt the weight on his body begin to lessen. As he reached out further, his hand met something cold, smooth, glass. A mirror. The light was coming from within it, radiating outward in gentle waves. His reflection appeared in the glass, but it wasn't just his face staring back at him. It was something more. Eli's reflection was different. His eyes were no longer the hollow, fearful eyes he had seen in the dark corner of the lodge. No, his reflection was full of clarity. His skin was glowing faintly with an ethereal light, and his expression, though still tense, had a determination he hadn't known he possessed. The figure in the darkness, still towering over him, seemed to retreat as if recognizing the power of the light. It hesitated, its long, twisted limbs freezing mid-motion, and then the shadows around it began to pull back, like they were being held at bay. The figure spoke, its voice now distorted and strained, as if it was fighting to keep control over its domain. "You cannot hide behind that light forever, Eli," the figure rasped, its tone losing some of its earlier confidence. "This place is ours. The darkness is your true home." Eli's reflection in the mirror flickered, and he saw the faintest glimmer of something alive, moving within the depths of the glass. The light flickered and pulsed with each breath he took, but it wasn't just his reflection that moved now. The image inside the mirror was shifting. He could feel it. The air around him seemed to bend. His heart, still heavy, raced as a wave of understanding washed over him. The figure in the dark, the shadows, it wasn't just trying to trap him. It was trying to consume him. To make him one with the darkness, just as it had done with everyone who had stepped into the lodge before him. But this, the light, the mirror, it was offering him a way out. He didn't understand it fully. It felt like some ancient magic, something far older than the lodge itself. But Eli knew one thing. It was the only thing that could free him. In a surge of desperation, Eli raised his hand to the mirror. His fingers brushed the cold surface, and as he made contact, a rush of energy pulsed through him, like electricity coursing through his veins. The shadows recoiled, hissing violently as though the mirror was a portal, a threshold that no darkness could cross. "No!" the figure screamed, its voice twisting with rage. "You cannot escape. You belong to us." Eli's reflection in the mirror began to move on its own, its eyes locking with his. The reflection's mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, a low, rumbling hum filled the space between them, resonating deep within Eli's chest. The hum turned into a chant, a rhythm, a pulse, and he felt it sinking with his heartbeat, pulling him closer, urging him forward. It was a song, a call. "Come," the reflection whispered, its voice now eerily calm. "Step into the light." Eli's heart raced. He felt his body being torn between two forces, the shadows still tightening their grip and the light reaching out to him like a beacon of hope. His fingers trembled, but he did not hesitate. With a final, desperate push, he pressed his hand flat against the mirror, his palm warming as the light from within the glass poured into his skin, filling him with a force he couldn't comprehend. The shadows shrieked, a sound of pure anguish as they were pushed back by the light, retreating into the corners of the chamber. The figure staggered, its body twitching violently as if it were being torn apart by the force of the mirror's light. And then, as if a dam had broken, the light exploded outward. Eli's body jerked forward, his heart pounding in his chest as the light enveloped him entirely. The shadows screamed, their voices fading as the light consumed everything around him. He was no longer in the chamber. He was no longer in the lodge. He was somewhere else. He didn't know where. All he knew was that the weight of the darkness had lifted. The suffocating cold, the oppressive presence of the shadows, it was all gone, replaced by a profound stillness. The air felt light, as though he had risen above it all. Eli opened his eyes. Before him stood an endless stretch of forest, but it was different now. The trees were no longer gnarled and twisted. They were tall and straight, their branches reaching up toward the sky, bathed in the soft, golden light of an eternal dawn. The ground beneath him was soft, covered in moss, and the air smelled fresh, clean. There was no darkness, no ominous presence. And yet, the feeling of being watched never left him. He turned around. Behind him, the lodge stood, but it was no longer the same. It was distant now, far behind him, barely visible through the trees. The windows, once dark and empty, glowed faintly as if alive. A soft whisper lingered in the air, almost imperceptible, but Eli heard it clearly. "You can never truly leave." The light from the mirror still pulsed in his chest, a constant reminder of what he had barely escaped. And though the shadows were gone, for now, Eli understood one thing. The forest, the lodge, it would always be with him. The forest was quiet, eerily so. The air felt like it was holding its breath, as if the trees themselves were waiting, watching. Eli stood still for a moment, the soft glow of the light still pulsing in his chest, steady and warm, a stark contrast to the suffocating cold that had once gripped him. But the peace he had found in the light was fleeting. Even as the shadows receded and the forest opened up around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, waiting. The whispering still echoed in his mind, faint but insistent. "You can never truly leave." The words dripped with an unsettling finality. They had come from the forest, from the lodge, from the very darkness that had tried to claim him. He turned around once more, half expecting the twisted, decaying structure to loom over him again, but it was distant now, barely visible behind the thick trunks of the trees. The golden light bathed everything around him, painting the forest in an ethereal glow, but he knew better than to trust the beauty of it. The forest, in all its strange, deceptive calm, was far from safe. The ground beneath his feet was soft, the moss squelching under his boots as he began to move forward. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and though there were no signs of the creatures that had once stalked him in the lodge, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. He wasn't sure if it was the memory of the shadowed figures or something more primal, but the instinct to keep moving, to not stop, was stronger than ever. As he walked, the golden light around him flickered, and for the briefest moment, the forest seemed to shift. The trees grew taller, the trunks thicker, their roots twisting into the earth in bizarre, unnatural patterns. The soft glow that had bathed everything in a gentle light now felt distant, fading. In the distance, Eli thought he saw something move, a figure perhaps, but when he blinked, it was gone. His heart raced, but he forced himself to continue. He could feel the pressure of the forest on him, the heavy silence settling deeper, the weight of unseen eyes resting on his back. Every step seemed to carry him further into the heart of this place, further away from any hope of escape. And then it happened. The path beneath him started to change. The ground became more uneven, the moss giving way to sharp rocks and twisted roots. The air grew colder, the light dimming to a faint flicker, like a dying flame. Eli's footsteps slowed, a creeping dread growing in his gut. The whispers returned, louder this time, their voices overlapping, their words indecipherable, but the tone was unmistakable, a warning. You cannot leave. Eli spun around, heart pounding, expecting to see something, or someone, but again there was nothing. Just the trees. The thick, looming trees that seemed to close in on him, the branches reaching out like hands trying to grab him, pull him into the depths of the forest. The wind picked up suddenly, rushing through the trees with a mournful wail. The light from the mirror flickered once more, and the darkness within the forest seemed to shift. And then, before he could react, a sound filled the air, a sound that froze him in place. A distant, bone-chilling laugh. Low and guttural, like the sound of something ancient and evil stretching its limbs after centuries of slumber. Eli's heart skipped a beat. The laugh came again, this time closer. It was followed by a whisper, barely audible but unmistakably sinister. We are always watching. The forest seemed to move with the laugh, as if it were alive, responding to the dark presence that had been awakened. The trees shuddered, their branches bending in unnatural directions, as though they were reaching out toward him. Eli's breath caught in his throat as he turned to look down the path ahead of him. The trees parted, creating a narrow gap where the forest beyond seemed impossibly dark. The golden light from the mirror flickered one last time, then went out entirely, plunging him into an overwhelming blackness. The path was gone. He was surrounded by nothing but the suffocating darkness of the forest, and the whispers were louder now, swirling around him, filling his mind. His pulse raced, panic clawing at his chest. He had to move. He had to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The darkness pressed in on him, thick and oppressive, like a blanket of cold, suffocating air. And then, as if in response to his fear, the trees began to close in around him, the branches bending and twisting toward him with unnatural speed. He could hear them snapping, cracking, as though something was making way for him to pass, something that wanted him to go deeper. A strange light flickered in the distance. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it called to him, like the pull of a distant star. The whispers grew softer as he turned toward it, their voices fading as the light began to grow. It was no longer golden, but blue now, a strange, cold light that emanated from deep within the forest. Eli felt his heart slow. The light was drawing him in, pulling him forward, like the hands of the forest itself were beckoning him toward it. His feet moved on their own, following the path that had reappeared in the darkness, the strange, cold glow guiding his way. The laughter was gone, replaced by a sense of calm, a calm that felt wrong. Something about the light felt wrong. It was too still, too serene, and yet it promised something. An answer, maybe, or a conclusion. And despite every warning his instincts screamed at him, despite the undeniable dread that clawed at his throat, he couldn't resist. As he walked closer, the trees parted further, revealing a clearing in the middle of the forest. The ground was bare, the earth covered in frost and cold mist that rose like steam. At the center of the clearing stood another structure, a different one from the lodge, but just as ancient, just as twisted. It was a stone monument, shaped like an archway, its surface covered in strange runes that pulsed faintly in the light. Above it, a symbol, a crescent moon surrounding a jagged star, was etched into the stone, glowing with a pale, eerie light. Eli approached cautiously, his heart racing again as a cold wind swept through the clearing, making the mist swirl and dance around him. The closer he got to the archway, the more he felt it, the pull like a gravitational force drawing him into the monument, into whatever waited beyond it. The light in the clearing flickered, growing dimmer. And then a voice, deep and resonant, sounded from the monument itself. Come, it said. Come into the hollow. Your journey is not yet over. The shadows from the forest stirred, crawling out of the trees, stretching toward him like 1,000 reaching hands. They were all around him now, surrounding him, but they were different, more insistent. They weren't just threats anymore. They were a part of him. The voice came again, louder now, filling his mind, drowning out everything else. Come, Eli. Your place is here. Eli stepped forward, his legs heavy, his body trembling. There was no way out. The path had led him here, and there was no turning back now. And as he stepped through the archway, the darkness swallowed him whole. Eli stepped through the archway, and the world as he knew it seemed to shift. The ground beneath his feet dissolved into nothingness, replaced by a weightless sensation. For a moment, he felt suspended, floating in an abyss where time and space didn't seem to exist. The air around him was thick with an unnatural stillness, and for the briefest of moments, he wondered if he had crossed into some otherworldly place. Some space that existed between life and death, where the boundaries of reality bent and warped. His chest tightened. His heart still raced, but there was no longer the frantic rush of panic. Instead, there was something else, something cold and hollow, a deep, resonating emptiness that crawled into his mind, filling it with whispers that tugged at his consciousness like tendrils of smoke. Come. The voice was soft, but it echoed in his bones, like a distant bell tolling in the quiet dark. It felt both foreign and yet familiar, as if it had been with him for longer than he could remember. Suddenly, the ground reappeared beneath him, solid and cold, as though it had been waiting for his feet to land. His boots made no sound as they touched the surface, and the air was even colder than before, sharper, like it had been drained of warmth. Eli's breath caught in his throat as he surveyed his surroundings. He was no longer in the forest, no longer in the clearing. He stood now in a vast, open expanse, a hollow if there had ever been one. The sky above was an endless sheet of black, devoid of stars or light, the void stretching on forever in every direction. The earth beneath him was smooth and lifeless, devoid of any plant or animal. It was as if the land itself had been drained of all vitality, leaving only a barren, sterile wasteland behind. But what struck him most were the towering figures stretching high into the blackness above. They looked like trees, but not like any trees Eli had ever seen. Their trunks were jagged and twisted, their surfaces smooth like polished stone, yet there was no life within them, no green, no leaves, nothing. They stood as silent sentinels, their dark silhouettes looming like forgotten giants watching over him. Their presence was suffocating, as if they were alive in some ancient way, a dead forest frozen in time. As Eli took in his surroundings, a faint glow appeared in the distance. It was small at first, like a single flickering flame, but it grew brighter with each passing second. It pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat, drawing him in, guiding him through the desolate hollow. He took a step forward, his feet moving of their own accord as if he were being pulled by some unseen force. His body felt detached from his mind, his movements slow and deliberate, as though every step he took was already planned out for him. The whispers returned, this time louder, filling the space around him. You are here now. You are one of us. There is no turning back. Each phrase sent shivers down his spine, but he didn't stop. His legs moved as if the force was too great to resist. He was a marionette in this vast, empty place, strung along a path that he knew would lead him further into the hollow. The glow in the distance grew brighter still, now a pulsing orb of golden light, the source of which seemed to float above the ground like a distant star. Eli's breath hitched as he approached it, the warmth of the light strangely inviting against the oppressive cold that had settled in his bones. But as he grew closer, the light flickered, casting long shadows over the ground. The warmth he felt was like the warmth of a dying fire, an illusion of comfort. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more frantic. It's waiting for you. The hollow has claimed you. You belong here. Eli's eyes locked onto the light, and as he reached out toward it, he felt something stir inside him. Something ancient, something buried deep within his chest. The warmth spread through him, igniting a strange sensation of recognition. The hollow, the darkness, it was familiar. As his fingers brushed the edge of the orb, the world around him seemed to freeze. The light exploded outward, consuming everything in its path. Eli gasped as he was surrounded by an intense brightness that made his vision swim. He closed his eyes, unable to bear the sheer force of the light. When he opened them again, everything had changed. He was no longer in the hollow. He stood now in a vast chamber, its walls made of the same smooth, dark stone as the trees that had surrounded him. The air was thick with a cold mist, and the floor beneath him felt like glass, cold and unforgiving. At the center of the room stood a massive structure, a towering, jagged column of stone, twisted and angular, its surface covered in strange, pulsating symbols that flickered like firelight. The entire chamber felt alive, as though the walls themselves were breathing, shifting ever so slightly with each exhale of the dark air. The whispers surrounded him, not just in his mind now, but all around him, 1,000 voices murmuring in a language he could not understand. Their tones rose and fell like the ebb and flow of a tide, a constant rhythmic sound that seemed to pierce through his skull. And at the base of the stone column, there was a figure, a shadowy form standing motionless, its face obscured by the hood of a tattered cloak. The air around it seemed to warp, bending and shifting as though the figure itself were drawing power from the very space around it. "Welcome," the voice rumbled from within the shadows, low and guttural like the sound of the earth groaning. The figure lifted its hand, and Eli felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure in his chest, like something was pulling at him from deep within. "You have crossed into the hollow," the figure continued, its voice reverberating in his mind. "And now you are bound to it. Bound to us." Eli's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the figure. The air seemed to thicken around him, each breath feeling like a struggle, like the very atmosphere was pressing against him. He wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. The figure took a step forward, and the ground beneath Eli's feet trembled slightly, as if the very earth was alive, responding to its presence. "The hollow is eternal," the figure said. "It is a place between worlds, a place where all things lost find their home. And you, Eli, are no longer a visitor. You belong to the hollow now. Forever." Eli tried to step back, but his feet wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, the pressure in his chest growing, squeezing the air from his lungs. The figure reached out, and Eli felt the pull of its presence, an irresistible force dragging him forward toward the stone column. The whispers rose to a crescendo, filling his mind with a sound that was both beautiful and horrifying, like a hymn sung by an ancient, forgotten choir. The walls seemed to close in around him, the shadows shifting and writhing like living creatures, as if they were part of him now, part of the hollow. The figure's hand hovered just above his chest, and for a moment, Eli felt a strange sense of peace, a fleeting sense of belonging, as though he were meant to be here all along. But then the figure's hand descended, and Eli felt the hollowing inside him begin anew. The figure's hand brushed against Eli's chest, and with that touch, everything within him seemed to snap. A cold, sharp pain shot through his body, like 1,000 needles piercing his skin all at once. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. It was as if the figure was tearing into his very soul, pulling it apart piece by piece. The air around him seemed to distort, vibrating with an unnatural energy as the pressure in his chest intensified. Eli gasped, his body tensing, fighting against the invisible force that held him in place. His limbs shook, but he could not move. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that clamored for his attention, drowning out everything else. "You are ours," they said, 1,000 voices in unison. "You belong to the hollow now." Eli's heart thundered in his chest. He could feel the darkness seeping into him, not just through his body but through his very mind. It was as if the hollow was taking root in his thoughts, feeding on his fear, his confusion, his despair. The sensation was overwhelming, like being submerged in an ocean of cold, murky water, the weight of it pressing down on him until he could barely breathe. The figure's presence loomed over him, its form shifting in the dim light, as if it were not entirely of this world. The cloak it wore billowed around it, dark and tattered, but the shadows seemed to cling to it, twisting and writhing like living things. The figure's face remained hidden beneath the hood, but Eli could feel its gaze on him, cold and penetrating, as though it could see straight through to his soul. "You have crossed the threshold," the figure spoke again, its voice low and resonant, echoing in the chamber. "And now the hollow has claimed you." Eli's breath hitched. The words reverberated through him, but there was something else in them, a promise. Or perhaps a warning. The hollow wasn't just a place. It wasn't just an eerie, desolate realm between worlds. It was something more. It was alive. And it was hungry. The figure stepped closer, its presence pressing in on him from all sides. The shadows around them shifted, moving like liquid, swirling around Eli's feet and legs, binding him even further. He tried to resist, tried to break free, but it was useless. The more he fought, the tighter the shadows pulled, the deeper they sank into his skin, into his bones. "You are not the first," the figure continued, its voice almost tender, as if speaking to a child. "And you will not be the last. The hollow is eternal, a place where the lost souls of the world are drawn. They come like you, seeking answers, seeking escape, but they never leave." Eli's throat tightened as he struggled to breathe. His mind was a whirlpool of fear and confusion, but there was something else, something darker, a creeping feeling that he had always been meant for this. Meant to be here in the hollow, a part of its endless cycle. The figure lifted a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, and with a single motion, it reached toward the stone column at the center of the chamber. The symbols etched into its surface began to glow faintly, pulsating with a rhythm that matched Eli's heartbeat. A low hum filled the room, reverberating deep within his chest, vibrating through his bones. The figure spoke again, its words like a chant, ancient and forgotten. "We are the keepers of the hollow. We are the ones who guide those who are lost. And now you are one of us." Eli felt something shift inside him, as though the very fabric of his being was being altered. The hollow wasn't just a place. It was a force, a consuming, eternal entity that fed on the souls of those who wandered into its grasp. And Eli, like so many before him, had become its next victim. The shadows continued to wrap around him, crawling beneath his skin, filling him with an unnatural cold. His body felt heavy, his limbs numb, as though the life was being drained from him with every passing second. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might lose consciousness. But just as quickly, the sensation of the hollow's cold embrace returned, pulling him back from the edge. "The hollow is not a prison," the figure whispered, its voice softer now, almost soothing. "It is a sanctuary." Eli's mind recoiled at the thought. A sanctuary? How could this place be a sanctuary when it was filled with nothing but darkness, emptiness, and suffering? How could it be anything but a prison, when it kept those who entered it trapped in its endless grip, unable to escape? "You will see," the figure continued, its tone almost gentle, like a mother speaking to a child. "When you understand the truth of the hollow, you will no longer fear it. You will no longer resist. You will become one with it, just as all who come before you have." Eli felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though something was tearing through him, ripping apart the very essence of who he was. His body spasmed, and his breath caught in his throat. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. The figure's words continued to echo in his mind, like a mantra he could not shake. "The hollow takes all who enter. But in return, it offers something far greater than what you had before. It offers belonging. It offers purpose." The world around Eli seemed to blur, and the stone column at the center of the chamber loomed even larger. The pulsating symbols grew brighter, more insistent, and with each beat, the shadows grew stronger, thicker. Eli could feel them pulling at him, digging deeper into his soul. He could feel himself slipping. Something was happening to him. He could feel his very identity beginning to unravel, the threads of his past slipping through his fingers like sand. The hollow, cold emptiness inside him grew, as though it were becoming a part of him, filling him from the inside out. And with it, a strange, terrifying sense of peace. The hollow was claiming him. And for the first time, he was starting to understand. The fear, the resistance, it was all fading. It was being replaced by something else. Belonging. Purpose. The figure's voice echoed one last time, reverberating in his mind as the shadows closed in around him, their cold touch sinking deeper into his skin, filling every part of him with their dark, endless hunger. "Welcome to the hollow, Eli. You are home now." And with that final word, Eli felt himself begin to disappear, to become just another lost soul swallowed by the hollow, never to escape, never to be remembered. Eli's consciousness seemed to split, fractured into 1,000 pieces. Each part of him was drawn in different directions, but always tethered by the same endless force that held him to the hollow. It was as though the world was no longer linear, no longer tangible. The sensation was like being pulled through time itself, as if he were being stretched out of his own body and then slowly, deliberately reeled back in. He could feel his thoughts, his memories, fading. The last remnants of his life outside the hollow were slipping through his fingers, like water through a sieve. His name, his identity, the faces of the people he had once known, they were all becoming distant, like echoes from a dream that was slipping away with each passing moment. But the pull of the hollow was undeniable. It wasn't just physical, it was everything. The very fabric of reality around him seemed to warp in its grasp, twisting and distorting until all that existed was the unrelenting, suffocating emptiness. Eli's eyes opened, but the world around him was not what he expected. The chamber he had been in, the column, the shadows, the oppressive darkness, had all faded. Now he stood in the middle of a vast, endless expanse, the ground beneath him smooth and unbroken, stretching far into the distance. There was no sky above, only a dense, black fog that rolled across the horizon, thick and oppressive, like a blanket that smothered the very air. The feeling of being watched returned, pressing against him from all sides. The air was cold, but not cold enough to freeze him. It was the kind of cold that felt like it could seep into his bones, turning him into one with the darkness, numbing every part of his soul. His heart pounded in his chest, but each beat felt more distant than the last, like the rhythm of his life was being slowly extinguished. He tried to move, but his body felt foreign to him. His legs were heavy, his arms sluggish. It was as if his muscles no longer responded to his commands. He could barely feel his fingers, and when he looked down at his hands, they were different. Not in a way that was immediately obvious, but there was a subtle change. His skin looked almost transparent, a faint, ghostly light passing through it. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the expanse, growing louder with each passing second. Eli's heart raced as he turned toward the noise, but there was nothing to see. Only the black fog, swirling and shifting like it was alive. The sound grew louder still, until it became a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath his feet. Then, out of the fog, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette, tall, looming, and distorted by the fog. As it stepped forward, Eli could see more clearly. The figure was a man, or at least it seemed to be. But his features were obscured, his face hidden behind a mask of smooth, featureless stone. His body was draped in dark robes, and his hands were extended out before him, as if guiding the very fog that surrounded them. The figure's presence was overwhelming. Eli felt it like a weight on his chest, like the air had become thick and unbreathable. Every step the figure took caused the world around Eli to shudder, as though reality itself was warping in response to his movement. "You are here," the figure's voice said, deep and resonant, yet cold, inhuman. The sound of it vibrated through Eli's bones. It was as if the voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "And you will never leave." Eli's breath caught in his throat. The words were familiar, too familiar. He had heard them before, from the shadows, from the hollow itself. He had heard them in his mind, in his dreams, in the whispers that had followed him. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask who this figure was, but no words came. His throat was dry, his voice lost, as though it had been stolen from him the moment he stepped into the hollow. The figure seemed to notice his struggle. It tilted its head slightly, as though studying him. "You were not meant to speak," it continued. "You were meant to listen, to understand." A sudden, violent force ripped through Eli, and he staggered back, his vision blurring. The air around him seemed to bend, pulling him forward against his will toward the figure. His feet slid across the smooth ground, dragging him closer with an almost magnetic pull. It was as though the figure were drawing him in, forcing him to kneel before it. When Eli finally came to a stop, he was kneeling before the figure, his head bowed, his hands trembling. He couldn't control his body. He felt the pressure in his chest again, that suffocating weight of the hollow pressing in on him, drowning him in its cold embrace. The figure raised one hand, and with a single motion, the fog parted, revealing something beyond it. A doorway, an archway black and jagged, its edges glowing with an unnatural light. The light pulsated like a heartbeat, rhythmic and steady, yet full of a dark, sinister energy. "This is the path," the figure said, its voice quieter now, but still filled with power. "The hollow is not a place. It is a cycle. A never-ending journey of souls lost, wandering through eternity, seeking, and never finding." The fog swirled around Eli's feet, closing in on him like a cage. He could feel the whispers again, more urgent now, pressing against his mind, trying to pull him into their depths. His heart beat faster, and he tried to resist, but the weight of the hollow was too much. The figure's words echoed in his skull, filling his head with their dark truths. "You are not the first to come here," the figure continued, its eyes glowing beneath the mask. "And you will not be the last. Each soul that crosses into the hollow is lost, wandering through the endless expanse, searching for an answer that will never come. The hollow is a place of yearning, a place of endless longing. But the longing, it never ends." Eli's breath quickened. He could feel the weight of the figure's gaze on him, penetrating deep into his soul. And in that moment he understood. The hollow wasn't a place for the dead, it was a place for the lost. The ones who had been broken, who had nothing left but the desire to be found, to be whole again. And yet, here in the hollow there was no salvation. There was no release. Only the never-ending cycle of those who wandered, those who searched, those who yearned for something they could never grasp. The figure stepped closer, its shadow enveloping Eli like a cloak, casting him in a darkness that was deeper than the black fog itself. "You will wander with the others," the figure whispered, "forever, searching for the light, but always falling into the shadow." Eli's vision blurred again, his body trembling violently, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw faces in the fog. Hundreds of faces, pale and hollow-eyed, drifting like ghosts through the mist, each one searching, each one longing, and none of them ever reaching the light. And then, as his mind fractured into 1,000 pieces, he realized with a cold certainty that he, too, would become one of them. One of the lost. One of the endless. Eli's senses became muffled, as if the world around him was growing dimmer with each passing second. His breath became shallow, labored. The weight of the hollow pressed down on him from all sides, suffocating him, as though the very air were trying to pull him into its endless depths. The figure before him loomed like a mountain, its form shifting in and out of focus, its presence all-consuming. The whispers had grown into a constant murmur, an incessant cacophony that filled his mind with their endless yearning. The voices, disembodied and ancient, spoke in a language he couldn't comprehend, their words clashing with each other like the sound of 1,000 waves crashing against rocks. Each syllable seemed to strike him like a hammer, pounding away at his resolve, breaking down what little remained of his consciousness. And then, as if everything had fallen silent in that moment, a memory stirred within him. A flash. A face. It was a woman, her face soft and familiar, the kind of warmth that felt like home. Her eyes, bright and full of life, were fixed on him with a gaze that was both comforting and full of sorrow. Her lips whispered something to him, something important, but the words were lost to the winds, fading like echoes in a vast, empty space. His chest tightened, a sharp pang of longing coursing through him. Who was she? The question rang out in his mind, but the memory slipped away before he could grasp it, leaving only an aching emptiness. The hollow had claimed him fully now, not just his body, but his memories too. Everything was becoming a blur, his past dissolving like mist under the harsh light of the truth he was starting to understand. Eli wanted to scream. He wanted to tear away from this place and return to the world he had known, but that was no longer possible. The hollow had woven itself too deep into the fabric of his being, and the cycle of yearning, of longing, was more powerful than any hope for escape. The figure in front of him began to move again, its robes flowing like liquid shadows, its feet making no sound as they glided over the smooth ground. It raised one hand, and the fog parted before it, revealing a path that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. It was a path Eli knew he must follow, compelled by some unseen force, unable to resist. The fog swirled around him again, pulling him toward the path, its icy tendrils coiling around his legs like shackles. "Come," the figure's voice commanded. It was gentle, but there was an underlying force to it that Eli could not ignore. "You are a part of this now. You will walk the path of the lost, the ones who wander for eternity, seeking something they can never have." Eli's heart pounded in his chest, a rhythmic beat that seemed to match the pulse of the hollow itself. He wanted to resist, to fight, but he had no strength left. He was too far gone. The figure's words rang in his mind, filling the empty spaces where his thoughts had once been. He couldn't escape. There was no way out. The cycle would continue. He was now a part of it, one of the lost souls that drifted through the hollow, endlessly searching, never finding, always yearning. The path ahead of him stretched on into the distance, a dark tunnel of mist and shadows. Each step he took felt heavy, like his feet were sinking into the earth itself, dragging him further into the void. And yet there was something else there, something more subtle, a pull toward the path. It beckoned to him like a song heard on the edge of sleep. It was familiar, like the promise of something he had once known. As he walked, his mind began to fragment. He couldn't remember where the path had started or where it was going. The fog closed in around him, muffling the world. The figure that had once stood before him seemed to fade into the shadows, its presence lingering but distant now. Eli was alone. He was always alone. And yet, as he walked, he began to feel it again, the pull. It wasn't the figure's voice, nor the hollow's whispers. It was something else entirely, a presence. It was there in the fog, in the dark, lurking just beyond the edges of his vision. He felt it behind him, following him, its presence like a shadow stretching out to cover him completely. Every step he took, the pull grew stronger, urging him to go faster. "You cannot escape." The words echoed through his mind, but they were no longer the figure's voice. They were his own. Eli's feet moved on their own now, his legs no longer his own. His steps quickened, his breathing shallow, his chest tight with an unknown pressure. He didn't want to move faster, but something was pushing him forward, urging him to go deeper into the fog. The whispers began again, only this time they weren't just distant murmurs. They were close, surrounding him, caressing his ears with their low, insistent tones. "You are one of us." The words seeped into his skin, into his blood, into his very soul. And as the fog closed in around him, wrapping him in its cold embrace, he felt it. A terrible understanding, like a veil, had been lifted. The hollow was not just a place. It was a cycle, a never-ending loop of those who had been consumed, trapped in an eternal state of longing, of searching. Eli was now a part of that cycle, bound to it. His body, his soul would never know peace again. He had become a part of the hollow, one of the lost. He was not meant to escape. The fog thickened, and his steps became slower, more deliberate. He could feel the weight of the hollow pressing in on him from every side. The path had no end. There was no destination. Only the endless journey, forever seeking, never finding. But then, through the fog, a glimmer of light appeared. It was faint, a flicker in the distance, but it was there. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing him toward it. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more frantic. The hollow itself seemed to tremble in response. Eli's feet moved faster, his body pushing him forward as if the light were a beacon, a hope for something more, something beyond the endless fog. But with each step, the light flickered, its pulse growing weaker, like it was slipping further away. It was the last trace of the world he had once known, the world he had lost. And though he could feel the hollow consuming him piece by piece, he still longed for that light. He still yearned for it. And so Eli walked, through the fog, through the darkness, forever seeking, never finding. The fog thickened around him, curling like the fingers of unseen hands, pulling at the edges of his consciousness. Eli could feel the darkness tugging at him, wrapping him in its cold embrace, urging him to surrender to its pull. His heart beat steadily, a constant rhythm in the silence, but every thump seemed to echo in his mind, growing louder, more frantic with each passing moment. He was losing himself, losing the pieces that made him him. The light, once faint, now pulsed more urgently ahead of him, like a heartbeat quickening in the distance. Eli's legs carried him forward, the pull of the light almost magnetic. The shadows around him seemed to stretch and warp as he moved, their dark forms twisting and writhing, distorting in unnatural ways. They were watching him, waiting for him to falter. The hollow had a way of tempting its prisoners, teasing them with the illusion of escape, only to pull them back into its grasp when they grew too close to freedom. The light beckoned, but Eli could feel the weight of the hollow pressing against his chest. The fog seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive, the air colder, sharper, as if every step he took was deeper into the abyss. Yet the light, the hope, was still there, flickering in the distance like a dying star. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't let himself be swallowed by the darkness completely. But the whispers, they never stopped. They were louder now, sharper, like claws scraping against his skull, trying to pull him back into the depths. The voices of the lost, the ones who had walked this path before him, their mournful cries filling the air with a sense of despair that made his breath catch in his throat. You can never leave. We are all lost. You belong here just like us. Each whisper felt like a knife digging into his mind, carving away at the fragile threads of his will, but still he walked on. Each step, each movement felt like a battle. His body screamed with fatigue, his muscles burned, but the pull of the light, the promise of something beyond this eternal drift, was too strong. He had to reach it. The fog parted for a moment, and Eli's heart skipped as he saw it. A figure, tall and cloaked, standing at the edge of the light. It was almost a silhouette, its form flickering in and out of existence like a shadow made of smoke. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but Eli could feel its presence. Heavy, suffocating. The hollow seemed to hold its breath as the figure slowly raised a hand. You cannot escape. The voice was a low growl, distant but unmistakable, reverberating through the very air. It was not the voice of the figure itself. No, this voice came from the hollow, from the depths of the darkness that surrounded him. It was the hollow's voice, its will. It was speaking through the figure, reaching out to claim him once more. Eli's legs wavered, his body unsteady, but he forced himself to continue forward, step by trembling step. The figure's gaze, though unseen, was heavy upon him. He could feel it, an intense weight pressing against him, as if the figure were not just watching but weighing him, judging him. And as Eli approached, the light flickered once again, growing fainter, like it was being swallowed by the very fog he was trying to escape. His breath came faster, desperation creeping in. No, I can't lose it. Not now. Not after everything. The figure seemed to melt into the fog, its form dissipating as if it were nothing more than a part of the mist itself, a ghostly illusion meant to lure him deeper. Eli staggered, his chest tight, the pull of the hollow dragging at his very soul. His vision blurred, and the edges of the fog seemed to distort, the world around him growing ever more surreal, like he was walking through a half-remembered dream. His footsteps faltered, but he did not stop. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Not when the light was so close. Not when it seemed to hold the answers he had been searching for. Answers that could free him, answers that could break him from the cycle. But with every step, the voices grew louder. The whispers, the cries, the pleas of the lost souls who wandered this place before him. Their voices blended into a maddening hum, a sound that clawed at the very edges of his sanity. Join us. You are already one of us. You will never find your way out. Eli's vision swam, the fog thickening around him like a dense cloud. His heart thundered in his chest, the beat of it now matching the pulse of the hollow itself. His hands shook as he reached out toward the light. It was so close, yet it felt like it was slipping further away with each movement he made. He wanted to scream, to fight, but the fog pressed in, suffocating him, forcing him to bend to its will. He was losing his grip. The light, the hope, was fading. But then, through the mist, a voice called out, distinct from the others, clear and familiar. It was a voice that stopped him dead in his tracks, causing him to freeze. Eli. He looked around frantically, his heart pounding. His mind reeled. That voice wasn't from the hollow. It was the same voice he had heard in his memory, the woman's voice, the one that had whispered to him in the depths of the fog. His chest tightened, his throat constricting. Eli, don't listen to them. You can still find your way back. The voice was gentle, filled with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold, suffocating darkness around him. It was a lifeline thrown into the storm, a beacon of hope in the endless night. Eli's heart stuttered in his chest. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe, but the pull toward the voice was undeniable. The hollow wanted to claim him. The fog wanted to drag him back, deeper into its endless cycle of despair. But this voice, it called to him like a memory he couldn't quite remember but longed to. His mind flashed back to that face, the woman's face, the one from the fleeting memory. He reached out into the fog, his hands trembling, feeling the coldness of the mist swirl around him, threatening to drag him down. Eli, come back. The light flickered once more, but this time it didn't fade. It strengthened, pulsing with an intensity that matched the frantic beat of his heart. And in that moment, Eli made a choice. He stepped forward, through the fog, through the darkness, through the cycle, and toward the light. Eli's heart thundered in his chest as he moved forward, his every step now fueled by something stronger than the hollow, suffocating grip. The light, once faint and fleeting, now pulsed like a star breaking through the darkness, its warmth reaching him through the fog like the first rays of dawn after an endless night. His body, though weary and torn by the weight of the hollow, responded to the call of that light, like a flame reaching out to the only thing that could save it from the suffocating darkness. Each breath came more easily now, as though the very air had shifted. The oppressive fog that had clung to him, tightening like chains, loosened with every step he took toward the beacon. The whispers that had been gnawing at his mind faded, their voices distorting into a dull hum, like a forgotten song played on an old, broken radio. Eli's legs felt heavy, his feet dragging with exhaustion, but there was a fire now, a spark of defiance inside him that refused to go out. He couldn't remember how long he had wandered through the hollow, how many steps he had taken in search of escape. Time had become a strange, warped thing, twisting and stretching like the fog itself. But in this moment, with the light ahead, it felt like all of it. The endless wandering, the darkness, the oppressive weight of the hollow, had led him here to this one defining moment. The fog parted before him, revealing a vast, open space, no longer the endless expanse of shadow and mist, but a place that felt familiar, like a memory he had almost forgotten. A clearing bathed in a soft, golden light, the kind of warmth that came from something pure, something real. Eli's eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. It was a forest. Not the twisted, barren trees that he had seen in the hollow, but real, living trees, their trunks thick and gnarled with age, their branches stretching high into the sky, heavy with vibrant green leaves that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, fresh and clean, like the world had just been reborn after a long, cold winter. The ground beneath him was soft with moss, and the sound of a nearby stream babbled gently in the distance, its waters clear and cool. This was not the hollow. This was life. The light that had drawn him here seemed to pulse with a new rhythm now, softer, more inviting, like it was leading him somewhere. And as Eli moved toward it, he felt something inside him shift. The hunger for the light, the desire for escape from the hollow's grasp, grew stronger, and yet there was something else, something deeper, something that called to him from this place. And there, at the edge of the clearing, standing as if waiting for him, was the figure. The woman. Her face was soft and serene, her eyes wide and filled with a warmth that seemed to shine brighter than the light around her. She was dressed in simple, flowing clothes, and her hair cascaded down her back like a river of gold. She stood still, watching him, her expression both welcoming and sorrowful, as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Eli stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. There was no mistaking it. This was the woman from his memory, the one whose voice had called to him in the fog. Her gaze softened as she took a step toward him, and in that moment, Eli felt the weight of everything, The years, the longing, the darkness of the hollow, fall away. There was no more fear, no more confusion. He was no longer trapped in the cycle. Eli, her voice was a whisper, gentle but powerful, like the sound of wind rustling through leaves. You found your way here. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. There was so much he wanted to say, so many questions. How had she found him? What was this place? But her gaze was so steady, so knowing, that all his questions seemed to fade, leaving only the overwhelming sense of peace that radiated from her presence. She reached out a hand, her fingers delicate, but the light that seemed to pulse around her hand was warm and inviting. Eli took a step forward, drawn to her, his feet almost moving of their own accord. The light around her seemed to envelop him, filling the spaces where the hollow had once filled with despair. It's not too late, she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of something ancient, something profound. The hollow was never meant to hold you forever. It was meant to show you what you truly are, to strip you of everything that made you forget. Eli looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? What am I? Her smile was faint but full of understanding. She took another step toward him, her presence like a balm against the searing pain that still lingered in his chest, remnants of the hollow's grip. You are more than the hollow. You are more than the lost souls it claims. You are the light that the hollow cannot touch, the spark that it seeks to snuff out. Her eyes shone with a brightness that made Eli feel as though he was gazing into the heart of something endless. You were always meant to find your way back here, Eli. The hollow could not keep you. Not forever. Eli swallowed, his mind racing, but his body moved closer to her, drawn in by the comfort and warmth she exuded. The light around her flickered and brightened, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. But the hollow, Eli's voice trembled, the memories of the dark, suffocating place still vivid in his mind. The hollow is a part of you, she said softly, her eyes steady on his. It is the place where souls are born anew, where they face the darkness within themselves. It cannot consume you unless you let it. You must learn to accept the darkness in order to walk toward the light. Eli stood there, unsure, his chest heavy with the weight of her words. Was that what he had been doing all this time? Wandering through the hollow, searching for something, not knowing that the very thing he sought was inside him all along? You are the answer, she continued, her voice like the caress of a summer breeze. The hollow shows you what you need to see, not what you want to see. It brings out your fears, your doubts, your brokenness, but you, she placed a hand over his chest, right where his heart beat. You are the light that can never be extinguished. The ground beneath them seemed to hum, the earth alive with an energy that resonated deep within Eli's bones. The fog that had once surrounded him began to dissipate entirely, replaced by a warm, golden glow that filled every corner of the forest. The trees seemed to sway more gently now, the leaves rustling in harmony with the rhythm of the earth. Eli closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. He could feel the tension in his chest loosen, the chains that had bound him to the hollow slipping away. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was free. But what happens now? Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, she said with a gentle smile, you begin again. The ground beneath them began to shift, transforming into something new, something vibrant and alive, like the first breath of spring. Eli felt his heart swell with an emotion he had not felt in so long, hope. He opened his eyes and looked at her once more. There was no fear now, no uncertainty, just peace, and a promise. Eli stood in the heart of the clearing, surrounded by the vibrant forest that had come to life before his eyes. The woman's presence, calm and steady, lingered beside him, her words a soft hum against the backdrop of the newfound peace. The air was warm, fragrant with the scent of pine and earth, and everything felt, for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, real. Not a dream, not a memory, but something tangible, something he could hold on to. For so long, he had wandered through the hollow, trapped in its endless cycle of yearning and despair. Each step had felt like it would be his last, each breath like he was suffocating beneath the weight of his own fears. But here now, in the heart of this untouched forest, he could breathe freely. He could feel the earth beneath his feet, solid and grounding, and for the first time he felt like he had found something, not just a place but a piece of himself he had long forgotten. The woman stood beside him, watching the transformation around them. Her gaze was filled with a quiet knowing, as if she understood something Eli hadn't yet fully grasped. This is the beginning, she said softly, her voice like the wind rustling through the trees. The hollow is a test, Eli. It is not a prison but a trial. It shows you who you are by stripping away everything you thought you knew. Every fear, every doubt, every lie you told yourself. It breaks you down to the very core of your being so that you can rebuild yourself anew. Eli turned to her, his heart pounding with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. But how do I rebuild? How do I move forward after everything the Hollow showed me? It took so much from me. Her eyes softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand in a gesture that felt both comforting and grounding. It took nothing from you, Eli. It only revealed what was already inside. The Hollow didn't steal your soul. It awakened the parts of you that were hidden, the parts you were too afraid to face. Eli blinked, the weight of her words sinking in. Could that really be true? Had the Hollow, in all its suffocating darkness, simply shown him his own fears, his own weakness? Was that why it had felt like such a consuming, inescapable force? Because it wasn't external? It wasn't a separate entity but a reflection of his own inner turmoil? He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words echo through him. He could feel them unraveling something inside, like the first thread of a knot being pulled loose. Slowly, he began to realize that the Hollow had not just been a place of torment. It had been a mirror, a brutal mirror that had forced him to face the very things he had run from for so long. His regrets, his mistakes, his fears, all of it had been brought to the surface. And now, in this place, this new place, he was being given the chance to rebuild. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "How do I rebuild?" The woman smiled, a soft, radiant expression that seemed to warm the entire clearing. "You start by accepting that everything you've been through was necessary. You cannot move forward until you embrace the parts of you that the Hollow forced you to confront. The darkness, the pain, the loss, they are all part of you, but they do not define you." Her words wrapped around him like a balm, soothing the raw, aching places within his heart. The weight he had carried for so long, the burden of his fears and regrets, seemed to lift just slightly. For the first time in so long, he could see the path ahead of him, not as a shadowed, fog-filled corridor, but as a wide, open road. And for the first time, Eli felt that he could walk it without the suffocating weight of the Hollow dragging him back. The woman extended her hand to him once more. This time, it wasn't just a gesture of comfort. It was an invitation. "Come," she said, her voice filled with a quiet urgency. "You've been given the chance to start over. But that doesn't mean the journey will be easy. There are always choices ahead, choices that will shape who you become. The Hollow may no longer hold you, but the world beyond it is vast, and it is filled with challenges." Eli's hand trembled slightly as he reached for hers. His fingers brushed against hers, and in that moment, something shifted within him. A spark, a kindling of something new, a sense of possibility. His heart was still heavy with the echoes of the past, the ghosts of the Hollow's grip still lingering in the back of his mind, but the woman's presence was like a lighthouse in the distance, guiding him toward something brighter. "I'm ready," he whispered, his voice barely audible against the rustling of the leaves. "I'm ready to move forward, to leave the Hollow behind." She smiled, and the world around them seemed to brighten, the trees stretching higher into the sky, their branches weaving together to form a canopy of green, bathed in golden light. The forest felt alive, not just with nature, but with something more, something intangible like the promise of a new beginning. "Then let's walk together," she said softly. "Let's find the path that leads you home." Eli nodded, his chest swelling with a sense of calm he had never known before. They began walking together, the soft earth beneath their feet as they moved through the clearing, the trees parting in front of them as if making way for their passage. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, birds calling in the distance, the whisper of the wind through the leaves, the gentle rush of the stream nearby. Everything felt alive. Everything felt right. As they walked, Eli's mind drifted to the lessons he had learned in the Hollow, the things he had been forced to confront. It had been painful, yes, but it had also been necessary. The Hollow had revealed his deepest fears, his greatest regrets. But in doing so, it had also shown him the strength he didn't know he had, the resilience buried deep within him. He had been broken, but not beyond repair. And now, standing here in the heart of this new world, he understood what the woman had meant. The Hollow had only shown him the pieces of himself that needed healing, and now it was time to rebuild. The path ahead of them was long, but with each step, the uncertainty that had plagued him for so long began to fade. The world beyond the Hollow was full of unknowns, but Eli no longer feared them. He had faced the darkest parts of himself, and he had survived. Now he was ready for whatever came next. Eli walked alongside the woman, the world around him a blur of green and gold, a symphony of life that hummed in the air like a melody long forgotten. The warmth of the sunlight filtered through the trees above, casting dappled shadows across the ground that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the breeze. The forest, alive and vibrant, seemed to breathe with him, its pulse echoing in his own chest. But as they walked, Eli's mind was drawn to the question that had been gnawing at him since the moment he had set foot in this place. Where are we going? What lay beyond this perfect, tranquil forest? He had left the hollow behind, yes. But what came next? Could he truly leave all the darkness of the past behind him, or would it follow him no matter where he went? The woman seemed to sense his thoughts, her pace never faltering as she glanced at him, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're wondering what comes next," she said softly, her voice as gentle as the breeze that swept through the leaves. "It's natural to question the unknown. After all, you've spent so long in the shadow of the hollow. But this is your beginning. This is where you take the first step toward your new self." Eli looked at her, his heart tightening with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "But I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted, his voice low, barely more than a whisper against the wind. "I've been so lost, trapped in the darkness for so long, I don't even know where to start." The woman smiled at him, her eyes shining with a deep, ancient wisdom. "That is the first step, Eli. The understanding that you've been lost is the key. It is only by acknowledging the darkness that you can truly find the light." Her words settled over him like a balm, soothing the raw edges of his soul. The hollow had shown him his deepest fears, yes, but it had also taught him something else. That to move forward, he had to confront his own vulnerability. He had to accept that the journey was not about erasing the past but embracing it. The pieces of himself he had once hidden in the shadows, the broken parts that had seemed irreparable, they were all a part of who he was now. And it was through those very pieces that he could rebuild. "We all have our paths to walk," the woman continued, her voice steady as she led him further into the forest. "None of us is born knowing who we are, Eli. It takes time. It takes acceptance. And sometimes, it takes loss to truly understand what we're meant to find." They walked in silence for a while, the soft crunch of their footsteps on the moss-covered ground the only sound breaking the stillness. With every step, Eli felt the weight of his past, the torment, the fear, the endless yearning begin to lift. The fog that had clouded his vision for so long was receding, and he could see clearly now not just the world around him, but himself. He wasn't who he had been in the hollow. He wasn't even the same person he had been before that. The journey had changed him, and in ways he was only beginning to understand. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and the forest opened up into a wide, open space. In the distance, Eli could see something that made his heart stop. An ancient stone gate, towering and regal, its surface worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. It stood at the edge of a cliff, the precipice dropping away into a vast, endless sea of mist below. The gate, though weathered by time, still held a sense of purpose, a solemn reminder of something ancient and enduring. "This is where the path truly begins," the woman said, her voice calm and reverent. She stepped toward the gate, and as she did, the air around them shifted, becoming heavier, thicker with anticipation. "Behind this gate lies the next phase of your journey. Beyond it, you will be tested once more. But this time, the test will be different. This time, you will face it not as someone who is broken, but as someone who has been healed." Eli's breath caught in his throat as he looked at the gate. He could feel its pull, the weight of its significance pressing against him. Something deep inside him stirred, a mixture of fear and excitement, uncertainty and curiosity. Could he really face what lay beyond? Could he truly step into the unknown once again, knowing that it would challenge him, change him, perhaps even break him once more? "Why do I have to face another test?" Eli asked, his voice shaky. "Haven't I already been through enough? Haven't I already suffered enough to prove that I'm worthy of moving forward?" The woman turned to him, her expression soft but firm. "You haven't suffered, Eli. You've learned. You've grown. The test is not to prove your worth. It is to prove that you are ready to embrace the truth of who you are. And the truth is, you will never be free of the darkness. It will always be a part of you. But that does not mean you cannot walk in the light." Her words sank deep into his heart. He realized then that the fear he felt, the uncertainty that still clung to him, was not something to be defeated. It was something to be embraced. The darkness, the light, the struggle, and the peace, they were all parts of the same journey. They were the pieces that made him whole. The woman smiled, her gaze warm and knowing. "This gate is not a barrier. It is a threshold, a place where you must choose to move forward. But know this, what lies beyond it will not define you. It will only reveal more of what you are already becoming." With that, she stepped aside, allowing Eli to approach the gate. He hesitated for a moment, his heart racing, the weight of everything he had been through settling heavily in his chest. The mist below him swirled, hiding whatever lay beyond the cliff, but he knew deep down that he had no choice but to move forward. This was the next step. The only step. He reached out, his hand brushing against the cool stone of the gate, and as he did, a surge of energy passed through him, a crackling sensation that tingled in his fingertips. The gate creaked, its massive doors slowly beginning to open, revealing a glowing path that stretched out before him, winding through the mist. Eli took a deep breath, letting the peace he had found in the forest fill him once more. His heart steadied, and for the first time in his life he felt whole. And then, with a steady resolve, he stepped forward into the light. The moment Eli stepped beyond the gate, the world around him seemed to change. The mist that had once obscured the path ahead lifted, revealing a landscape that was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was as if the very fabric of reality had shifted, stretching into new dimensions, painting the world with colors and sensations he had never imagined. The path that lay before him was unlike any road he had walked before. It was not a simple trail through a forest or a winding road through a valley. It was a vast expanse of space, stretching out in all directions, filled with towering structures of stone and glass that gleamed with an ethereal light. These structures were not buildings in any traditional sense, but rather towering monoliths, each one carved with intricate patterns and symbols, swirling and shifting as if alive. The ground beneath his feet was not dirt or grass, but a smooth, translucent surface that seemed to ripple with energy, like a calm sea beneath his step. The air here was different too. It hummed with a low vibration, almost imperceptible but undeniable. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with an ancient energy, alive with a presence that resonated deep within his core. The light was soft but pervasive, coming from all directions, casting no shadows, and giving everything an otherworldly glow. Eli could feel the power of this place, the sense of something vast and ancient beyond his understanding. And yet, despite the beauty, there was an unease that clung to him. There was a quiet feeling, a tug at the back of his mind, as if he were walking through a dream that could shift and change without warning. The air was thick with possibility, and as he took his first steps onto this new world, Eli realized that this was not just a place, but a realm that existed between worlds, a place that held the echoes of all that had come before. The woman who had guided him so far had vanished, her presence lingering only in the soft hum of the air, the gentle warmth of the light. Eli was alone now, but for the first time he didn't feel lost. He felt found. The journey had stripped him of everything he had thought he knew, but now, in this strange new world, it was as if he was finally becoming whole again. Eli's gaze was drawn to the distant horizon, where the path seemed to fade into an infinite expanse of shimmering light. There was something at the end of the path, something that called to him, though he could not see it clearly. It was a feeling, a pull deep within his chest, a beckoning that tugged at him with an intensity he could not ignore. He began to walk, his steps slow and deliberate. Each movement felt purposeful, as though every footfall carried him toward something inevitable, something he had always been meant to find. But as he walked, the world around him began to shift again, the air growing heavier, the ground beneath him pulsating with a strange energy. The landscape began to change, subtly at first, but then more dramatically. The monoliths that had once stood tall and still now seemed to warp, their forms twisting and contorting like living things. The smooth surface of the ground beneath his feet fractured, cracking open like glass, revealing deep, swirling shadows that seemed to pull at the edges of reality itself. The light that had once been so soft and all-encompassing now flickered and dimmed, casting the path in a murky twilight. Eli's heart raced, and for the first time since he had entered this place, he felt the weight of fear pressing down on him once again. The sense of unease that had clung to him before was now undeniable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Something unseen, something ancient. His mind flashed back to the woman's words. The test is not to prove your worth, it is to reveal what you are becoming. Was this the test? Was this the moment when everything he had learned in the hollow, everything he had faced, would be brought to the surface once again? The shadows that seemed to swirl beneath the cracked ground whispered to him, calling his name in voices that felt familiar but distant. Eli, the whisper came again, soft and haunting like the call of someone lost. It was a voice he didn't recognize, but it tugged at his heart like a thread pulling him back to something he couldn't quite remember. Eli, we are waiting for you. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the whisper echoed through the air. He looked around, his eyes scanning the shifting landscape, but saw nothing. Only the empty, shifting horizon that stretched on forever. There was no turning back now, no way to retreat into the safety of the forest he had just left. The gate had closed behind him, and there was only forward. The only way out was through. He quickened his pace, his steps growing more hurried, his heart thudding in his chest. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, their tone shifting from haunting to something darker, more desperate. Eli, the voices grew stronger, coming from all directions now, as if the very landscape itself was calling to him, pulling him deeper into the shadows. You cannot escape. You are one of us. You are the one we have been waiting for. The ground beneath him cracked further, and Eli felt the very earth begin to tremble. His eyes darted around as the world twisted, the path before him now a jagged, fractured landscape, stretching out into an abyss of swirling darkness. And then he saw it, a figure standing in the distance, silhouetted against the dim light, its shape vague and indistinct. But it was watching him, its gaze intense, its presence heavy in the air. The whispering voices grew louder, melding together into a single unified cry, filling the air with a shrill, almost maddening pitch. It is your fate, Eli. You belong here. Come to us. Eli's steps faltered as the figure began to move, its form drawing nearer, shifting with the wind. He could feel its gaze piercing through him, as if it could see into the very depths of his soul. His heart raced, and the fear that had once been dormant inside him surged to the surface. He wanted to turn back. He wanted to run. But something deeper inside him, the part of him that had been forged in the depths of the hollow, pushed him forward. This was his path. This was his test. He had faced the darkness before. Now he would face it again. Eli took a deep breath, steadying himself, and continued forward, his gaze fixed on the figure in the distance. The path before him was cracked and broken, but he walked it anyway. The light flickered, but he moved toward it, toward the unknown, toward whatever awaited him on the other side. The hollow had tried to break him, tried to consume him, but it had only made him stronger. And now he would walk through the shadows once more. But this time he would do it on his own terms. The path was waiting. Eli's footsteps echoed in the shifting landscape, each step reverberating through the fractured ground, the very air around him vibrating with an energy he couldn't quite comprehend. The figure in the distance grew larger with every step, its form becoming more defined, more solid, as if it were being pulled out of the darkness itself. It was humanoid, tall and broad, yet its features were blurred, like it was made from the very shadows that danced across the fractured earth. The air grew heavier, thick with the weight of an ancient presence, and Eli could feel the pressure pressing against him as if the very fabric of the world was bending to the will of this mysterious figure. The whispers continued, no longer a cacophony of voices but a single unified sound, deep and resonant, like a distant chant that rose and fell with the rhythm of the earth. Eli. The voice was familiar but different this time. It wasn't the soft, comforting whisper from before. No, this voice was deeper, older, one that carried a weight of inevitability. You've come far, but you still don't understand. You still don't know your place. Eli stopped in his tracks, the ground beneath him quivering as if in response to the voice. The figure, now towering before him, seemed to ripple like a mirage, its shape constantly shifting between human and something far darker. Its presence was undeniable, the air around it heavy with an oppressive force that seemed to drain the very warmth from his body. Who are you? Eli's voice trembled, his throat dry as the words left him. He had faced the darkness before, but this was different. This wasn't just the hollow. This was something else entirely, something ancient, something that had been waiting long before he had ever set foot in the mist. The figure's form twisted, its edges blurring like smoke, and then it spoke again, its voice reverberating through the air as though it came from every direction at once. I am the echo, the keeper of the path, the one who watches all who seek to walk beyond the hollow. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, the realization hitting him like a bolt of lightning. The keeper? His mind raced as the words sunk in. But, what is this place? What do you want from me? The echo's form seemed to grow larger still, its shadow stretching across the land, filling the space around them with an overwhelming presence. What I want, Eli, is simple. I want you to understand. To accept. The voice grew softer now, but still filled with that unshakable weight, as though it was speaking not just to him, but to the very core of his being. The hollow was never meant to trap you. It was meant to shape you, to forge you into something new. And now, you must decide what you will become. Eli felt a tremor in the air, his body instinctively taking a step back, but he couldn't bring himself to look away. The echo's presence was magnetic, pulling him in, drawing him closer to its truth, its inevitability. I was forged in the hollow, it continued, its voice now echoing with a faint, otherworldly sound. I am a reflection of what you could become. A reminder that even in the darkest places, there is a way out. His mind swirled with questions, but none of them felt complete, none of them felt like they mattered. Something about the echo's words rang true, resonating deep within him. The hollow had changed him, yes, but was it really just a test? Was it something he could choose to overcome, or had he become part of it in some way? Forged in the hollow? Eli whispered to himself, trying to understand. So this is all connected. Yes, the echo responded, its voice filling the space around them. The hollow is not just a place. It is a trial. It is a crossroads. And you, Eli, have reached the moment where all paths converge. The time to choose is now. Eli's legs felt heavy, the weight of his past and future pressing down on him all at once. The landscape around him seemed to shimmer, blurring between worlds, between memories and possibilities. The path he had walked to get here was no longer clear, no longer linear. It twisted and spiraled, like an endless maze that led nowhere or everywhere. I don't understand, he said, his voice catching in his throat. I thought I was supposed to be free. I thought I was leaving the hollow behind. But now it feels like I can't escape it. It's still here. The echo's shape flickered, its eyes, or what Eli perceived as eyes, glowing with an unsettling, knowing light. You never truly leave the hollow, Eli. Not completely. It is not a place but a part of you. A part of all who walk this path. It is a reflection of the fear and the darkness that we all carry within ourselves. The test is not to escape it, it is to accept it and find the strength to move beyond it. The ground beneath Eli's feet shifted again, and for a brief moment he felt as though he was standing on the edge of the world, the path stretching endlessly in front of him, a vast sea of mist and shadow. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, the decision. The one that would define his next step, his next moment, and perhaps even his entire future. What was he supposed to choose? It is a choice, the echo intoned, its voice now both comforting and terrifying in its finality. A choice to embrace the light within you, to use the lessons you have learned and the strength you have gained. Or, the figure's shape wavered again, flickering like a dying flame, and for a brief moment Eli saw something darker, something other, within it. Or you may choose to return, to embrace the darkness and allow it to consume you once more. The ground trembled beneath him, and Eli felt the pull of the abyss, the pull of the hollow, calling him back, tempting him to return to the comfort of what he knew, even if it meant sinking into despair once more. It was a tempting choice, easy, familiar, but the thought of it, of returning to that dark, suffocating place, filled him with a visceral horror. No, the words slipped from his lips, quiet but firm. I won't go back. I won't give in. The echo's form flickered, its shadow extending further into the distance. Then Eli, it said, its voice almost a sigh. You must take the final step. You must walk the path that only you can walk. The mist around him began to swirl, and Eli felt something shift inside himself. A deep, resonant pull like a string being tightened within him. His heart beat faster, but this time it was not with fear. It was with purpose. He had made his choice. He had faced the darkness and the temptation, and he would not turn back. With a steady breath, Eli stepped forward, his feet pressing against the fractured ground as he continued down the path. The light ahead of him glowed brighter, and though the darkness still tugged at his soul, he now understood something crucial. The hollow could not claim him. Not anymore. He had found something within himself that no darkness could touch. He had found the strength to choose the light. And with that, Eli moved forward, leaving the echo and the shadows behind. The path before Eli stretched out endlessly, winding through the vast, shimmering landscape that seemed to defy all laws of nature. The ground beneath him was now solid, firm with the weight of purpose, as if each step he took was carving a new reality into existence. The mist, once swirling and oppressive, had receded further into the distance, revealing a sky painted in hues of gold and violet, stretching across an eternal horizon. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something sweeter, like blooming flowers in the distance. Something alive, something thriving. Eli's heart was still pounding in his chest, but it was no longer with fear. It was with something deeper, something more profound. He had chosen his path, and now there was nothing left to do but walk it. The light ahead beckoned, pulling him forward with the strength of 1,000 stars. He had felt the shadows tug at him, felt the weight of them trying to pull him back into the depths of the hollow. But he had fought that temptation. He had made the decision not just to move forward, but to become the person who could face what was coming. As he walked, his footsteps no longer echoed with uncertainty. They were confident, steady, each one bringing him closer to something real. His mind began to quiet, the constant noise of doubt and fear that had plagued him during his journey through the hollow slowly fading away. There was peace in this place, an undeniable peace that seemed to flow through the air like a quiet river, touching every part of him. For the first time, Eli allowed himself to truly feel what was around him, not just as a passing experience, but as something integral to his being. The ground beneath his feet was soft with moss. The trees that lined the path were tall and lush, their leaves rustling with a whisper of wisdom. The gentle wind that kissed his skin carried with it the promise of something ancient, something enduring. But even as he walked, the feeling of something else tugged at his awareness. It was not fear this time, but something different. A sense that this place was not just a realm of peace and light, but one of transformation. The very landscape around him seemed to shift with his thoughts, as though it was aware of his every decision, every internal movement. The horizon seemed to stretch further, the trees leaning inward as though they were guiding him toward something waiting at the end of the path. It was then that Eli noticed something in the distance, standing at the far end of the winding road, a figure. Unlike the echo, this figure was not shrouded in darkness or mystery. This figure seemed to glow with a soft, radiant light, its shape humanoid but not fully defined, as though it were made of the very essence of the air around it. The figure stood still, waiting, but its presence was not ominous. It was calm, serene, as if it had been there for as long as the path itself. Eli slowed his pace, curiosity swirling in his chest. Who was this figure? What did it want? As if sensing his thoughts, the figure raised its arm, and with a single, graceful motion, it beckoned him forward. Compelled by an instinct deeper than thought, Eli moved toward the figure, his steps light and sure. The closer he got, the more he felt a pull, a subtle, quiet hum in the air that seemed to vibrate with a frequency only he could feel. It was not a voice, but an understanding, as though the very being of this figure was communicating directly with him, without words, without sound. He was standing before it now, and though its form was still indistinct, there was something unmistakable about it. Its presence was both welcoming and challenging, a gentle pressure that seemed to seep into his bones. "Why do you stand before me?" the figure asked, its voice soft but powerful, like the first whispers of dawn breaking the silence of night. Eli blinked, startled by the sound of the voice. It was not as he had expected. It was not filled with authority or judgment. It was calm, as though it was speaking to him as a part of a much larger whole. I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. "I'm here because I chose to move forward. I chose to leave the hollow." The figure nodded, a small, knowing gesture. "And yet, you still do not understand," it said gently. "You have walked through the darkness, but the true journey lies not in leaving it behind, but in becoming it." Eli's heart skipped a beat, a chill running through him. Becoming it? His voice cracked slightly as he spoke the words. "I thought I was leaving the darkness. I thought that was the point." "Leaving it?" the figure echoed, its form shifting slightly, a soft glow intensifying around it. "You cannot leave the darkness, Eli. It is not something you can outrun, something you can abandon. It is within you and always has been." The hollow was not just a place, it was a part of you, a test, yes, but also a reminder. Reminder of what? Eli asked, his voice a whisper. The figure's presence seemed to grow more solid, more focused. "That the darkness is not the enemy," it said, its voice growing deeper, resonating with the air around them. "It is the teacher. It shows you who you are when you are stripped bare. It reveals your weaknesses, your fears, your doubts. And in doing so, it reveals your strength." Eli stood still, the weight of the words settling around him like a cloud. "So, I was meant to face the darkness?" he asked, more to himself than to the figure. "Not just face it," the figure replied. "You were meant to understand it, to embrace it as part of yourself. The darkness is not something to be fought. It is something to be integrated." Eli shook his head, confusion filling his chest. "I don't understand. Why would I need to embrace the darkness? Doesn't it make me weak? Doesn't it make me afraid?" The figure tilted its head, the glow around it pulsing like a heartbeat. "It makes you human," it said softly. "It makes you whole. Strength does not come from denying your darkness, from running from it. It comes from acknowledging it, from learning to walk with it, not against it. The true test is not to escape the darkness. It is to live with it and to find the light within it." Eli took a deep breath, the weight of the figure's words settling in. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had been running from his fears for so long, terrified that they would swallow him whole. But what if it wasn't about escaping them? What if the answer lay in facing them head-on, accepting them as part of who he was? The figure stepped closer, its form becoming more tangible, more defined. "You are not just a creature of light, Eli. You are a creature of both light and shadow. The path forward is not one of pure brightness. It is a path that will lead you through both, through the very things you fear most. Eli felt a stirring deep within his chest, a flicker of realization. The hollow had shown him what he was afraid of, yes. But now, in this moment, he could see it for what it truly was, part of him, just as much a part of his existence as the light that had led him out. The darkness was not the enemy. It was the teacher, the guide, the mirror that showed him what he needed to understand about himself. The figure's voice was gentle now, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. Are you ready to take that next step, Eli? To walk with both the light and the darkness as one. Eli closed his eyes, taking in a slow, steady breath. He wasn't sure what the future held, but in this moment, standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, he finally felt like he understood. The darkness would always be there, but so would the light. And the path forward was not about running from one or the other, it was about finding balance. He opened his eyes, his heart steadied by the weight of this new understanding. I'm ready, Eli said quietly, his voice strong and unwavering. The figure nodded once, a soft smile crossing its features. Then walk, Eli. Walk through both and find your true path. With that, the figure faded into the mist, leaving Eli standing alone but not lost. The horizon before him stretched onward, endless and full of possibility. And for the first time in his life, Eli felt that he was not walking toward an escape. He was walking toward freedom. Eli stood at the edge of the path, his gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. The landscape around him seemed to pulse with a quiet, steady rhythm, like the beating of a heart too vast to fully comprehend. The sky above was a deep, endless blue, shifting and undulating like the ocean, while the earth beneath his feet hummed with an energy he had never felt before, ancient, powerful, and unyielding. For a moment, he stood still, breathing in the air that seemed to carry the very essence of the world itself. He had accepted the darkness within him, acknowledged it as part of who he was. But even now, in this moment of clarity, there was still a sense of waiting, as though something was on the verge of unfolding, something that would bring the final piece of the puzzle into place. And then he saw it. At the farthest point of the horizon, a flicker of light appeared, tiny at first, like a star winking into existence. The light grew brighter with each passing second, expanding outward until it filled the sky in a brilliant, blinding flash. The world around him seemed to hold its breath as the light stretched, twisting and expanding into a shape he could not yet comprehend. The earth beneath him rumbled, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to reverberate through his bones. He felt the air shift, the very atmosphere around him becoming charged with a strange, potent energy. The light began to take form, its edges growing sharper, more defined. And slowly, as the blinding brightness dimmed, Eli realized what it was. A bridge. A bridge of light, stretching across the vast expanse before him, its surface shimmering like liquid silver. It rose from the earth below and reached up into the sky, disappearing into the infinite expanse above. The bridge was like nothing he had ever seen before, elegant, glowing, and impossibly beautiful. It shimmered with an ethereal glow, casting rays of light in all directions, creating a path that seemed to stretch between two worlds. Eli's heart raced as he gazed at the bridge, the pull of its presence stronger than any force he had ever known. This was no ordinary structure. This was a connection, a bridge between the realm he had walked through and something beyond. Something greater. The whispers from the hollow, the words of the echo, the presence of the figure, all of it was leading him to this moment. This was the next step. This was what he had been waiting for without even knowing it. A voice, soft and familiar, echoed in the back of his mind. The journey is not over, Eli. You've learned much, but there is still more to understand. The darkness you have embraced is not something you will ever be rid of, but it is something you can control, something you can use, if you walk this path with wisdom. Eli's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward, the air around him humming with a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration. He could feel the power of the bridge, the energy of it pulling him toward it, urging him to cross. He had never been one to embrace the unknown so easily, but here now, in this moment, he knew that there was no turning back. The decision had already been made. With a deep, steadying breath, he took the first step onto the bridge. The surface of the bridge was cool beneath his feet, smooth and fluid like water, yet solid. It rippled as though alive, responding to his presence, stretching and shifting with every step he took. As he moved forward, the light that enveloped the bridge grew brighter, casting everything around him in a soft, almost otherworldly glow. And yet, as he walked, he felt the shadows at the edges of his mind stir. They weren't gone, not completely. The darkness that had haunted him, the fears and regrets that had plagued him for so long, were still there, lingering just beneath the surface. But they no longer gripped him with the same intensity. They were no longer a force that controlled him, that shaped his every thought and action. Now, they were something he could feel but not become. The bridge seemed to respond to him, its energy shifting with every movement, guiding him towards something. It was as if the bridge knew him, knew his doubts and fears, and was helping him navigate them. Each step was a test, a reminder of the path he had walked and the choice he had made. The darkness was still a part of him, but it no longer had the power to define him. The light ahead of him continued to grow brighter, and as he walked, Eli felt his body growing lighter, as though the weight of his past was slowly being lifted from him, piece by piece. The air around him was thick with an energy that he couldn't name, but it filled him with a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. He was walking through something ancient, something that transcended time and space, a force greater than anything he could understand. But it was more than that. This bridge, this path, was not just about reaching the end. It was about becoming something greater than he had ever known. The hollow had stripped him down, had shown him the parts of himself he had hidden, the darkness that lived within him. But now he was building. He was constructing something new, something whole. A version of himself that could hold both light and shadow, could navigate the vast unknowns of life without fear. Eli reached the halfway point of the bridge, and the light around him seemed to intensify, flooding the space with warmth and energy. It was as though he had crossed some invisible threshold, entering a new phase of his journey. The air was thick with possibility, and Eli could feel the presence of something. Someone, standing just ahead of him, waiting. He looked up, and there at the end of the bridge stood a figure. This figure was not like the echo, not like the figure of light he had encountered earlier. This was something different, something more familiar, yet more distant. It was as though it had no shape, no form, but yet, it was there, standing at the end of the bridge, waiting for him. The figure's presence was comforting, like the embrace of someone he had known in another lifetime, someone he had lost. It radiated warmth and understanding, like the gentle pull of the moon on the tides. Eli stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat as he stood face to face with the figure. He didn't need to ask who it was. He could feel it in his soul. The figure was his future, his destiny, the culmination of everything he had been through. The figure did not speak, but Eli could hear its voice, clear and calm, deep within his heart. Welcome home, Eli. Welcome to the place where all paths converge. This is where your journey truly begins. Eli's heart swelled with emotion as he realized the truth of the figure's words. The hollow had been a beginning, not an end. The darkness, the light, the choices, it had all been a preparation, a process of transformation. But this was the point of convergence, the place where everything came together. The place where he could finally understand the full depth of his journey. The figure extended its hand toward him, a gesture of invitation, and Eli, without hesitation, reached out and grasped it. And in that moment, as their hands touched, the light around him exploded into brilliance, and the world he had known, darkness and light, past and future, melded into one. The moment Eli's hand touched the figures, everything shifted. The world around him seemed to dissolve into light, the bridge, the sky, the distant horizon, all of it fading into a singular, radiant pulse. It was as if time itself had stopped, or perhaps it had simply unfolded, stretching, twisting, expanding into an infinite plane that defied all comprehension. Eli's body hummed with an energy so pure, so raw, that it felt like his very soul was being recalibrated, realigned with the universe. For a brief moment, he lost all sense of self. The boundaries between him and everything around him blurred. The light became not just something he saw, but something he was, something he felt. It was warm, gentle, and yet powerful, like the first rays of the sun after a long night, like the rush of air after a storm. And in that blinding radiance, Eli heard something. Not a voice, but a presence, a vibration in the very core of his being. It was ancient, primal, and yet somehow deeply familiar. "You have come far, Eli," the presence whispered, not in words, but in a profound understanding that filled his entire consciousness. "You have walked through the darkness and embraced it. You have faced your deepest fears and transformed them into strength. You have become whole." The figure standing before him was now no longer distant or vague. It was a reflection of Eli himself, a perfect mirror image, yet with an aura of light that Eli could not fathom. Its features were indistinct, shifting between human and something other, something celestial. The glow surrounding it pulsed like a heartbeat, a rhythm that matched the deep, resonant thrum inside Eli's chest. "This is your awakening," the figure continued, its presence expanding around them both like the very air. "You are not just a man, Eli. You are part of the universe itself, a thread woven into the fabric of existence. Your journey through the hollow, your trials, your fears, none of it was for nothing. It was all preparation for this. Eli's breath caught as the weight of those words pressed against him. He had always thought of himself as small, insignificant, a man trying to survive in a world that felt indifferent at best, cruel at worst. But now, standing in this place, with the figure before him, it was as if the very nature of his existence had expanded beyond the limits of his understanding. The notion that he was a part of something so much larger than himself was overwhelming. And yet there was peace in it. A profound, soul-deep peace. I don't understand, Eli murmured, his voice weak, almost lost in the swirling energy around him. What does this mean? What am I supposed to do now? The figure's form flickered, and for a moment Eli could see flashes of his past, images from his life before the hollow, before the darkness had consumed him. Faces, moments, fragments of memories, some painful, some joyful. Each image passed by like a fleeting dream, only to be replaced by another. It means you are free, the figure said, its voice now calm, filled with a quiet certainty. You are free to choose your path. The darkness is a part of you, but it does not define you. The light is also a part of you, but it is not something to be worshipped. It is something to be understood. The key to your journey, Eli, lies in the balance between the two. The light around them shifted, expanding outward, filling the entire horizon. It became clear that this was not just a realm, not just a place. This was a state of being, a plane where all things existed in harmony, where light and shadow coexisted, each giving meaning to the other. The boundaries of existence stretched out before him, endless, infinite. The feeling of it was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of the cosmos, gazing into the abyss of eternity. Balance, Eli whispered to himself. The word resonated with him like a truth he had always known but never fully understood. He had spent so long running from his darkness, trying to escape it, trying to be someone he wasn't. But now, in this place, he saw it clearly. The darkness was not something to fear. It was something to integrate, something to work with. And the light? It was not an escape from the darkness, but a way to navigate it. The figure reached out, its hand extending toward him once more. This time, Eli did not hesitate. He grasped it firmly, feeling its warmth flood through him. He could feel the energy of the universe coursing through his body, as if he were one with the stars, the earth, and the air itself. The connection was complete. Now you understand, the figure said, its voice filled with quiet pride. The journey is not about overcoming the darkness or about achieving enlightenment. It is about accepting that both exist within you. Together, they form the whole of your being. They are both the path and the destination. The journey itself is the point. Eli's heart swelled with a newfound understanding. It was not the end he had been seeking all along, but the journey, the process, the constant balance between light and darkness, joy and sorrow, hope and fear. These things were not opposites. They were partners, each shaping the other. He could see it now, the future that lay before him, the road that stretched out beyond the horizon. It was not a simple path, not a linear journey towards some singular goal. It was a series of choices, moments, and experiences, each one shaping him into the person he was meant to be. So what now? Eli asked, his voice steady but filled with awe. What do I do with this understanding? The figure's form shifted once more, becoming a soft glow, like the fading light of the evening sun. You walk, Eli. You live. You choose to embrace both your darkness and your light. You learn from them, you grow with them. And with each step you take, you become more than you were before. This is the beginning of your true self. The figure began to fade, its light softening, until it was nothing more than a distant glow on the horizon. And as it disappeared, the world around Eli settled into a stillness, a deep, comforting silence. Eli stood there for a long while, staring out at the infinite landscape before him. His journey had taken him through darkness, through fear, through pain. But now he understood. It was not about escaping those things. It was about living with them. And in doing so, he had found something deeper than he had ever known: peace. With that, Eli turned toward the horizon, toward the endless path that awaited him. The balance between light and shadow would be his to walk, but he knew now that he was ready. For the first time in his life, he felt truly free. As Eli stood at the threshold of the infinite horizon, his heart still pulsing with the energy of the figure's presence, the realization that he was no longer the same person struck him with a quiet force. The world around him had shifted, and he with it. The weight of the journey, of everything he had endured, seemed to settle like a blanket over his shoulders, comforting yet immense. There was no sound here, no rush of wind, no crackling of leaves. It was a profound silence, the kind that only comes when time itself seems to pause and observe. And in that stillness, Eli felt the full weight of the universe pressing against him, not with the crushing force of pressure, but with a gentle insistence. It was as though the world itself was waiting for him, for the next choice he would make. The path stretched endlessly before him, a road bathed in both light and shadow. It was no longer the simple dirt trail of the forest, nor the fractured, glowing bridge he had just crossed. This was something different. The surface of the road shimmered as though it were made of both earth and sky, alive, breathing with an energy that rippled with every step. There were no boundaries here, no walls, no limits. The path seemed to expand with his every thought, every breath. It was as though the road itself was an extension of him, mirroring his choices, his actions, and even his deepest desires. Eli took a deep breath and stepped forward. With his first step, the light around him brightened, not blinding, but gentle, like the warm embrace of the sun on a spring morning. The shadows that lingered at the edges of the path were not menacing. Instead, they seemed to dance playfully with the light, intertwining in a fluid, harmonious rhythm. The balance between them felt natural, as though it had always been this way. The further Eli walked, the more he realized that the journey was not about a destination. It was not about reaching some grand conclusion or finding an ultimate truth. It was about becoming, about living with the choices and the lessons he had learned, and about walking through the complexities of existence with both awareness and grace. As he walked, the landscape around him began to shift, not in abrupt, terrifying ways, but in subtle, almost imperceptible changes. The trees that lined the path were now more than just trees. They had a presence, a consciousness. Their trunks were twisted with ancient knots, and their leaves shimmered with a faint, otherworldly glow. Each tree seemed to watch him, not with judgment, but with an understanding, as though they had seen countless travelers before him, each one walking their own path through the balance of light and darkness. The air felt alive with stories. Eli felt it in the way the breeze whispered through the leaves, in the way the shadows flickered, never quite still. He wasn't alone here. There was a presence with him, a quiet but constant companionship, like the ancient spirits of the earth and sky were walking beside him, each step taken with reverence for the journey. The further he walked, the more the path began to change again. What had once been a serene, wide expanse of trees and light slowly transformed into something more mysterious. The trees grew taller, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their leaves darker, tinged with a shadowy hue. The road beneath his feet became uneven, the once smooth surface now cracked and jagged, as if time itself had carved its marks into the earth. But despite this shift, Eli did not feel fear. In fact, there was a sense of awe that filled him. This was not an ominous transformation. It was a natural one, a reminder that the journey was not linear, not predictable. It was a winding road, full of unexpected turns, moments of clarity and moments of shadow. It was a path that asked him to stay present, to experience everything, the joy and the sorrow, the light and the dark, as it came. As the path grew darker, the trees grew closer, their branches stretching out like arms as if to embrace him. The wind seemed to speak in a language he couldn't understand, but felt deep within his bones. A message from the earth, from the sky, from the universe itself. It was as if everything around him was alive, not just in the sense of physical existence, but in the sense of being part of something much, much larger. Eli continued forward, feeling the deep hum of the world vibrate within his chest. The road seemed to stretch out forever, and yet he knew that it was not about the distance. It was about the steps, the small, deliberate movements he made toward understanding, toward balance, toward acceptance. Suddenly, in the distance, Eli saw a figure standing in the middle of the path. This figure was different from the ones he had encountered before. It was not a being of light, nor a shadowy presence. It was simply there, standing in the quiet stillness, its form solid and real. As Eli approached, the figure turned toward him, its features faint but defined, like a person emerging from a mist. The figure was familiar, but in a way that was not quite him, yet not completely separate. As Eli came closer, the figure spoke. "You have made it, Eli," the figure said, its voice a soft echo in the stillness. "You have walked the path, embraced both light and darkness, and now you stand here on the threshold of your true self." Eli stopped, his heart thumping in his chest. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with a quiet curiosity. The figure smiled, and it was a smile that Eli recognized, though he couldn't place it. It was both warm and knowing, like the smile of someone who had watched him grow, watched him struggle, and watched him become who he was always meant to be. "I am you," the figure replied. "Or rather, I am the reflection of who you will become. I am the part of you that has been waiting, the part that has always known what was possible. You have walked through the darkness and the light, and now you understand that they are both part of you, part of your journey. Eli's breath caught in his throat as he gazed at the figure. It was like looking into a mirror, but not quite. He could see in the figure's eyes the echoes of all his choices, his struggles, his growth. It was a reflection of everything he had become. So this is it? Eli asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. This is who I am? The figure nodded, its form glowing softly in the growing twilight. This is who you have always been. This is the truth of you, Eli. Not the past, not the mistakes, not the fears. But the essence of you, the part that is capable of embracing the light and the shadow equally, the part that is capable of living with both. You are whole now. Complete. Tears welled up in Eli's eyes as he looked at the figure. For so long he had searched for something, an answer, a path, a meaning. But now, standing here, facing himself, he realized that the answer had always been within him. It wasn't something he could seek externally. It was something he had to become. Thank you, Eli whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for showing me the way. The figure smiled again, its eyes shining with a quiet knowing. The way was always yours, Eli. You simply had to walk it. With that, the figure began to fade, slowly dissolving into the shadows of the path, leaving Eli standing alone once again. But this time he was not lost. He was not searching. He was whole. The path stretched out before him, a journey that would never end, but that was okay. Because now Eli understood that the journey was the destination, and he was ready to walk it. With a deep, steady breath, Eli took another step forward. Eli walked onward, the path beneath his feet now feeling less like a road and more like a living, breathing entity. It pulsed with every step he took, as if responding to his presence, to his thoughts, to his very essence. The air had shifted again, no longer static, but swirling with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of rain and earth. It felt like he was moving through a space between worlds, a place where time and reality bent, blurred, and intermingled. He had crossed the threshold, yes, but there was no final destination ahead. No single end point. The more he walked, the more he realized the truth. This journey would never truly end. It was an eternal return, a cycle of becoming, unbecoming, and becoming once more. There would be no grand finale, no resolution to tie everything together. The journey itself, with all its twists, turns, struggles, and revelations, was the point. Eli smiled softly to himself, and that was enough. His mind, so often clouded by questions and doubts, now felt clear. He had sought meaning in the past, in the things he could touch, the places he could see, the people he could meet. But now he understood. The meaning wasn't out there. It was within him, unfolding with each new step, each new breath. Every part of him, the light, the darkness, the fear, the hope, was woven together in a tapestry that was uniquely his own. And in that understanding, he had found a profound peace. The road twisted and curved, stretching out before him like a living, breathing thing, always shifting, always changing. The trees that had once towered over him now seemed smaller, less imposing. The shadows that lingered at the edges of the path no longer felt threatening. Instead, they felt like old friends, reminders of the struggles he had faced and overcome. They were a part of him just as much as the light that now filled his soul. As Eli walked, the landscape continued to shift with him, adapting to his thoughts, his intentions. The world around him seemed to change according to his inner state, reflecting the ebb and flow of his emotions. When he felt doubt, the shadows grew longer, the air heavier. But when he felt a surge of confidence, the light seemed to grow brighter, illuminating the path ahead. There were no more moments of panic, no more doubts about his place in the world. The fear that had once paralyzed him seemed distant now, as if it belonged to another life. It had not disappeared, no, but it had been integrated, understood, accepted as part of the whole. The darkness was not an adversary. It was a teacher, a guide, a mirror that showed him his own vulnerabilities. And the light was not a savior. It was a reflection of his strength, his resilience, and his capacity for love. The further he walked, the more he realized that this road was not just a physical journey. It was a journey of the spirit, a passage through the layers of existence that had always been there, just beyond the veil of perception. And he was walking through them, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant, shaping the very world around him with his thoughts, his choices, his will. Eli reached a clearing, and in the center of it stood a tree. Unlike the others he had encountered along the path, this tree was ancient, its trunk wide and gnarled, its roots extending deep into the earth, twisting in ways that defied logic. The branches above him were covered in a strange, luminous fruit, glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. The air around the tree was thick with a strange, humming energy, like the tree itself was alive in a way no other tree had been. Eli approached cautiously, his hand reaching out to touch the bark. The moment his fingers made contact, the ground beneath him trembled, and the tree's glow seemed to intensify. A soft, deep voice echoed from the roots of the tree, resonating in his chest. "You have arrived," the voice said, its tone warm but heavy like the earth itself speaking. "This tree has always been here in the space between worlds. It is the root of all that is, all that was, and all that will be. It bears the fruit of knowledge, of understanding, of the truth that exists beyond time." Eli stepped closer, his heart pounding. "What is the truth?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "What is the truth that lies beyond time?" "The truth," the voice whispered, "is that time is not linear. It is not a series of moments strung together like pearls on a thread. Time is cyclical. It flows in waves, spiraling outward, folding upon itself. What you experience, Eli, is not a beginning or an end. It is a continuation, an eternal return to the self. You have walked through the darkness and you have walked through the light. And now you must learn to live in both." Eli's breath caught. Eternal return. He had heard the term before in stories and myths. It was the concept that time was not a straight line but a cycle. That everything in the end would return to itself. That every moment, every decision, was part of a larger, never-ending pattern. "How do I live in both?" Eli asked, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and curiosity. "You live with understanding," the voice answered, soft as a sigh. "You embrace the paradox of existence. Light and dark, joy and sorrow, life and death. Each exists only because the other does. You cannot have one without the other. And in that acceptance, in that knowing, you find peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of integration. You become whole when you accept that all things are part of you, part of the eternal cycle." Eli stood there for a long time, absorbing the words. He could feel them deep within his chest, resonating in his very bones. It was as though the universe had unfolded before him, showing him the intricate web of existence that connected everything and everyone. The journey was not about escaping darkness or striving for light. It was about accepting that both were necessary, that both were part of the same infinite dance. "You are ready now," the voice continued, its tone shifting as if it were fading. "The tree offers you the fruit of understanding. It is yours to take, to nourish yourself with, and to share with others. But remember this, it is not the fruit that will change you. It is what you do with it. How you carry it with you, how you share its wisdom, how you walk the path with both light and darkness in your heart." Eli reached up and plucked one of the glowing fruits from the tree. It was warm to the touch, its surface smooth and soft. As his fingers closed around it, he felt a surge of energy, like the pulse of the entire world flowing through him. He raised the fruit to his lips and took a bite. The moment the fruit touched his tongue, everything around him exploded into light, the world expanding and contracting with each passing moment. The ground beneath him trembled, and the sky above seemed to swirl, a vast cosmos unfurling in his mind. He saw the paths he had walked, the choices he had made, the people he had met, and he saw the connections between them, the threads that wove them all together in a pattern beyond his comprehension. But in that moment he understood. It was all one. The light, the dark, the journey, the destination, they were all part of the same eternal cycle. And in that understanding, Eli felt more whole, more connected than he ever had before. He stood there for a long time, staring at the fruit in his hand, feeling its power ripple through him. This was not an end. It was not even a beginning. It was simply another step, another moment in the eternal dance. And for the first time in his life, Eli felt at peace. The world around Eli continued to shift, the landscape bending with each passing moment like a dream on the edge of waking. The fruit's taste still lingered on his tongue, its warmth spreading through him like a slow, calming tide, and with it came a deep understanding, one that transcended words. The fruit had not simply been a source of nourishment, it had been a key to unlocking something deeper within him, something ancient and primal. He looked around again. The trees, the clearing, the path, all of it felt different now, as though the very air was charged with the energy of the universe itself. It was a quiet, tangible hum, resonating through every leaf, every stone, every grain of earth beneath his feet. The air seemed to shimmer with possibility, like a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth he had been blind to before. Eli stepped forward, the path now feeling less like something he was walking on and more like something he was a part of. It was as though the journey itself was alive, its rhythm syncing with his heartbeat, the pulse of the earth becoming his own. Every step he took felt as though it rippled outward, a subtle wave through the fabric of existence. The deeper he went, the more the world around him seemed to transform, folding in on itself, yet always expanding. The trees, their gnarled branches twisting and reaching, felt as though they were watching him, not with eyes, but with a knowing that stretched across the ages. The roots beneath him, stretching deep into the earth, seemed to anchor him to a place beyond time, beyond space, a place where all paths converged. He had understood the cycle of life and death, light and dark, joy and sorrow, but now he felt the truth of it. He was not just an observer of these cycles. He was within them. He was a part of the eternal ebb and flow, a thread woven through the tapestry of existence. And with each moment, with each breath, he was becoming something more, something that could not be defined by the limitations of his former self. The breeze whispered through the leaves again, carrying with it the scent of rain, of earth, and something else, something unfamiliar. Eli paused, closing his eyes as the wind kissed his skin, its message swirling around him like a soft melody. The words were not clear, not spoken aloud, but he felt them deep within his bones. "The journey is not over," the voice said, soft and knowing. "It has only just begun. You have stepped beyond the veil, beyond the world you once knew, into the space between. But remember, Eli, this place, this path, it is not one of escape. It is one of return. A return to what is, what has always been, and what will be." Eli opened his eyes, the clarity of the message settling in his chest. It was true. This was not an escape. He had not left the world he knew. He had simply moved beyond it. And in doing so, he had found himself in a place where time did not exist as he had once known it. Here there was no past, no future, only the now, the eternal present. But more than that, there was a sense of endless return. Each step forward was a return to himself, to the core of who he was, who he had been, and who he was becoming. He continued walking, and as he did, the path before him began to change again. The trees parted, revealing a vast expanse of water. It stretched out as far as he could see, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the sky above like a mirror. The water was dark, but not in a threatening way. It was deep, mysterious, inviting. The air grew still, the hum of the earth now replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Eli stood at the edge of the water, staring into the stillness. The reflection staring back at him was not just his face, but his soul. Every choice, every moment, every lesson learned. It was the totality of his being, both light and dark, intertwined in a perfect harmony. And as he gazed into the reflection, he realized something else. The water was not just showing him who he was, it was showing him who he could be. The realization hit him like a wave crashing over him. This wasn't just a reflection of the past or the present. It was a glimpse into the future, into the infinite possibilities of who he could become. And just like the water, those possibilities were fluid, always shifting, always changing. The reflection wasn't static, it was alive just as he was. Eli took a step closer to the water, and as he did, something shifted in the air around him. The surface of the water rippled, not in response to the wind or his movement, but to something deeper, a resonance between the water and himself. He reached out with his hand, and as his fingers hovered over the surface, the water seemed to respond, shimmering with a light of its own. "This is the mirror of becoming," the voice whispered again, soft and patient. "It reflects not just who you have been, but who you are becoming. Every choice you make, every path you take, shifts the reflection. This is where the circle closes, where the past and future meet, and where the endless return to self begins." Eli's heart raced, but it was not with fear. It was with something else, a deep understanding that the water was not just reflecting him. It was a part of him. It was the reflection of his potential, the infinite possibilities that lay within him, waiting to be realized. This was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would stretch across lifetimes, across worlds, across all the moments yet to come. He knelt by the water, his fingers dipping into the cool, dark surface. As his touch made contact, the water rippled once more, but this time the ripples didn't fade. They expanded, moving outward in concentric circles, as if the touch of his hand was sending waves through the fabric of reality itself. And as the ripples spread, the reflection in the water shifted again, showing him glimpses of different lives, different choices he could make, different paths he could walk. Some were filled with light, others with shadow. Some were full of joy, others of sorrow. But all of them were his. Eli closed his eyes for a moment, taking it all in. The water, the ripples, the possibilities. He understood now that there was no single linear path. The journey was not about choosing one road and sticking to it. It was about walking through all of them, learning from every step, every choice, every mistake. It was about becoming everything he could be and more. He opened his eyes again, looking at the water one last time. The reflection had settled, the ripples fading into stillness once more. But now it wasn't just a reflection of who he was, it was a reminder of who he could be. A reminder that the journey would never end, that the circle of becoming was infinite. Eli stood up, his heart full of peace, full of understanding. He didn't know where the path would take him next, but he knew that wherever it went, he would walk it fully, embracing both the light and the dark, the joy and the sorrow. Because the truth, the only truth, was that it was all part of him. And in that acceptance, he had found a peace that transcended time, a peace that would carry him through all the journeys to come. With a deep breath, Eli took his first step onto the path ahead. As Eli walked, the vast water stretched before him like an endless mirror, reflecting not just the sky but the infinite potential that lay within him. He could feel the weight of every choice he had made, every fork in the road, and how they had led him to this very moment. But the path ahead was not one he could predict, nor did he want to. The journey was not about certainty, it was about discovery. The air around him grew still once again, though it was now charged with a subtle, almost electric energy. He felt the presence of the earth beneath his feet, the breath of the wind against his skin, and the pulse of the universe within his chest. There was a deep, quiet hum in the air, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Eli continued to walk, his eyes focused on the horizon. It was not the end of the journey, he knew that now. It was the continuation of it, an endless unfolding, like the petals of a flower blooming in a time that stretched beyond the reach of moments. And as he walked, he noticed something new, a flicker of light ahead, just at the edge of his vision. It was faint at first, like the glow of a distant star, but it grew brighter with every step he took. He slowed his pace as he neared it, and what he saw made him stop in his tracks. In the distance, nestled between the trees, there was a campfire. The flames danced in the night, their orange and red tongues licking the air, casting flickering shadows on the ground. The fire itself was alive, not just in the way a fire burns, but in a deeper, more profound sense. It was as if it had a consciousness, an ancient, primal awareness of the world around it. Eli hesitated for a moment, standing at the edge of the clearing, the fire casting a warm, inviting glow across the ground. The wind carried the faint crackle of the flames and the distant scent of wood smoke. He had been drawn to fires before, during his time in the hollow, at moments of deep introspection, but this one felt different. It felt like an invitation, a beckoning. He stepped forward. As his feet moved closer to the fire, the air around him seemed to thicken. The light of the flames grew brighter, more intense, and Eli could feel the heat on his skin even from a distance. It was warm, comforting, but there was also a sense of danger. The fire was both a protector and a destroyer, a force that could give life and take it away in an instant. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between creation and destruction, of how the same force that brought warmth could also consume everything in its path. When Eli finally reached the edge of the fire's light, he stopped and looked down at the flames. They twisted and danced in a hypnotic rhythm, reaching upward, always seeking something more. For a long moment, Eli stood there, watching, his thoughts swirling like the smoke that drifted lazily up into the night sky. He realized that this fire, like everything else in his journey, was a metaphor, a reflection of the choices that lay before him. The flames were alive, but they were not permanent. They would burn out eventually, as all fires did. And yet, their light and heat had purpose. They had meaning for as long as they existed. This was not just a fire, it was a symbol of choice. The flames were the spark of possibility, the warmth of creation, and the destruction of endings. The voice that had spoken to him earlier from the tree and the water spoke again in his mind, softer now, like a gentle breeze through the branches. This fire is a gift, Eli. It is the flame of choice, the power to create, to transform, to shape your world with your own hands. But remember, it is not just a tool. It is a force of nature. It can warm you, guide you, or it can burn you. It is up to you how you wield it. Eli stood still, considering the message. The fire in front of him seemed to pulse with life, and he felt its call, as though it were asking him to take part in something much larger than himself. The fire was both a source of warmth and a challenge, a reminder that the choices he made would have consequences, both seen and unseen. The fire was not inherently good or bad. It simply was. It existed in its natural state, and it was up to him to decide how to interact with it. For a long moment, Eli reached out his hand, feeling the heat of the fire on his fingertips, but not touching it. He hesitated, sensing the weight of the decision. What would it mean to take the fire with him? What would it mean to carry its flame, to make it a part of his journey? Then the answer came to him, quiet but certain. It meant that he would no longer run from his choices. He would not fear the potential for destruction or loss. He would embrace the flame for what it was, a source of power, of transformation, of both creation and destruction. The fire was a reminder that every choice had its consequences, but also its potential. In embracing the flame, he embraced his own capacity to shape the world around him, to create meaning and beauty, and yes, to destroy what needed to be burned away. With a deep breath, Eli stepped forward and knelt by the fire. He held his hands just above the flames, feeling the heat spread through his palms, into his fingers, his arms. The fire whispered to him, its crackles and hisses a language he understood, a language of transformation. The voice in his mind spoke again, now tinged with a warmth that felt like a breath of wind against his cheek. "You are ready, Eli. Ready to embrace the flame. Ready to carry it with you. It is yours to shape, to guide, to use. And remember, you are not alone. The flame that burns within you is the same as the flame that burns in all things, through every moment, every choice, every journey. It is the eternal spark that lights the way forward." Eli closed his eyes and took in a deep breath, feeling the fire within him ignite, its warmth spreading through every fiber of his being. He could feel its power now, pulsing in time with his heartbeat, filling him with purpose, with understanding. The flame of choice was not just a tool. It was his essence, a reflection of his capacity to shape the world around him, to decide who he would be, and how he would walk the path before him. The fire before him burned brighter, its flames rising higher, the light casting long, stretching shadows across the ground. The world around him seemed to shift, the trees, the wind, the stars in the sky, all of it seemed to pause for a moment, as though waiting for him to take the next step. And then, as if the fire itself was guiding him, Eli stood up, his heart filled with a new clarity. He wasn't just walking the path, he was creating it. With the flame of choice now burning brightly within him, Eli turned and began to walk once more, the fire at his back lighting the way forward. As Eli walked away from the fire, its warmth still radiating through him, he felt a shift within himself. The flame was no longer just something he had seen or touched. It was a part of him now, embedded deep within his soul. Its heat still hummed through his chest, a constant reminder of the power he carried with every step. It was not a force to be taken lightly. It was not something to be feared, but to be wielded with both reverence and intent. The path before him had begun to change once again. The trees that had surrounded him, tall and silent, now seemed to lean closer, their branches reaching out like arms, as if they too had felt the fire's call. The air itself had grown heavier, thick with an energy that made the world feel both suspended and charged, like a storm waiting to break. Each step he took felt more deliberate now, more conscious. The flame inside him, now a steady warmth, seemed to anchor him to the earth, as though he were walking with the weight of the universe in his bones. He could sense it, the presence of the fire, not just in his chest, but in everything around him. It was in the way the wind whispered through the leaves, in the way the earth beneath him seemed to tremble slightly with each step. The world had become more alive, more responsive, as if every living thing was attuned to his presence. Eli's thoughts drifted back to the words of the voice that had guided him through this journey. "The flame is yours to shape, to guide," it had said. But what did that truly mean? What was he supposed to do with this power? Was the flame just a symbol of his inner strength, or was it something more? Something that could create, or even destroy? He had already walked through darkness and light, embraced fear and joy, sorrow and hope. He had learned to balance those forces, to carry both within him. But now, with the fire inside him, he could feel a new layer of responsibility, a new layer of choice. The flame was not just a passive presence. It demanded to be used. It demanded to be expressed. As he walked deeper into the forest, the path began to narrow, the trees growing thicker, their roots spreading across the ground like veins, intertwining and twisting. The air grew colder, and a low, rumbling sound echoed from somewhere deep in the forest, something between a growl and a hum. Eli felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, and he instinctively reached for the flame inside him, feeling its warmth flare in response to the growing tension around him. The path led him to a clearing, a vast open space surrounded by towering stones. In the center of the clearing was a large, circular stone platform, cracked and weathered by time. It looked ancient, as though it had been there long before Eli had arrived, long before the fire had ignited in his chest. The stones themselves seemed to hum with a strange, magnetic energy, drawing him toward them. Eli stepped onto the platform, the moment his foot touched the stone sending a shiver of energy through him, as if the very earth beneath him was awakening. The fire inside him responded instantly, flaring brighter, its heat intensifying. The air around him grew heavy, dense with power, and Eli could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the beat of the world's heart. He stood there for a moment, feeling the energy of the stones, the energy of the fire, the energy of the world itself, all converging in one place. It was as if he had reached the very center of the universe, the nexus of all creation. The path had led him here, and now, in this moment, everything was waiting. The silence was profound, not empty, but filled with potential. This was a place of forging, a place where things were made, where choices were not just made but shaped. The voice returned, its tone deeper now, resonating through the stones themselves. "This is the forge of will," it said, echoing around the clearing. "Here you will forge your future. The flame inside you is not just a power. It is a tool. It is the fire of creation, the fire of destruction, the fire of transformation. But it is not enough to simply carry it. You must shape it. You must decide what it will become." Eli felt the weight of the words in his chest, like the pull of gravity itself. He had thought that the fire inside him was a gift, something to be carried with reverence. But now, in the presence of this ancient forge, he realized it was more than just a gift. It was a responsibility. The flame could give life, but it could also take it. It could build worlds, but it could also burn them to the ground. He looked down at his hands, feeling the fire pulse within him, alive and hungry, seeking direction. The flames seemed to respond to his thoughts, shifting, twisting, as if waiting for his command. He understood now that the fire was not something that could be controlled through force. It was a force that had to be guided, focused, honed into something with purpose. The stones around him began to vibrate with increasing intensity, and the earth beneath him rumbled. The forge was awakening. The space around him seemed to ripple, bending and warping like the air before a storm. "The time has come," the voice said, now full of gravity. "What will you forge, Eli? What will you create with the flame? What will you burn away?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Eli closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the fire inside him, feeling its raw, untamed energy. It was more than just a force. It was potential. He could shape it, transform it, create anything from it. But what was he going to create? What would he make of this power? He thought back to his journey, the forest, the fire, the water, the trees. He had walked through so much, faced so many challenges, each one shaping him, each one transforming him. The flame inside him was the culmination of that journey. But it was also the beginning of something new. He opened his eyes and for the first time felt truly ready. The flame inside him burned bright, but now, it was not wild and untamed. It was focused, honed by his awareness, shaped by his will. Eli raised his hands toward the sky, feeling the flame rise within him, a brilliant light that illuminated the clearing. As he spoke, his voice echoed in the vastness of the space, his words resonating with the power of creation itself. "I will forge my path," he said, his voice steady and strong. "I will burn away the old fears, the old doubts. I will create with this fire, not destruction, but purpose. I will shape my destiny with it, and in doing so, shape the world around me." The fire surged in response, its light intensifying until it enveloped him completely. The clearing seemed to dissolve around him, the world bending and folding, as if the very fabric of reality was responding to his words, to his will. For a long moment, there was nothing but the fire, the heat, the light. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the blaze settled into a steady, glowing flame, a fire that was no longer wild and uncontrollable, but calm, focused, and strong. Eli stood at the center of the forge, his heart filled with a quiet certainty. He had not just embraced the flame, he had become it. And now, with the fire within him and the forge of his will at his feet, he was ready to continue his journey, not just as a traveler, but as a creator. The moment the fire within Eli settled, an overwhelming sense of calm washed over him, as though the entire universe had taken a collective breath. The world around him, the forge, the clearing, it all seemed to pause, held in a suspended moment of stillness. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Eli felt a profound peace, a sense of balance between the fire inside him and the world outside. The energy that had once felt volatile now felt steady, like the deep rhythm of the earth's heart beating in time with his own. But just as quickly as that peace settled, a new feeling began to stir within him. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but it was something. It was as though the very air itself had shifted, vibrating with a strange intensity. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble, and the wind began to pick up, whipping through the trees with an eerie, distant howl. The fire inside him responded, its glow pulsing, flickering as though it too sensed the change in the air. Eli's senses sharpened. He could feel the tension in the world around him, the anticipation of something yet to come. The energy that had once felt like a gentle, guiding force now felt like a storm, building, gathering strength. The voice returned in his mind, its tone low and resonant, as if echoing from the depths of the earth itself. You have forged your will, Eli. You have embraced the fire within you. But remember, the forge does not only create, it also tests. The storm is coming not to destroy but to challenge you. It is the tempest of your inner self, the storm of creation and destruction. Will you remain steady or will you be swept away? Eli's breath quickened as the wind around him howled louder, the trees bending under its force. The flames that flickered in his chest began to swirl, like a tempest contained within his very being. It was as if the fire had split, the energy now branching out in every direction, both creating and tearing apart the space around him. The air crackled with the raw power of potential, an energy so vast, so untamed, it could either shape the world or tear it to pieces. The storm is not the enemy, Eli, the voice continued, its tone now a whisper amidst the growing chaos. It is your reflection. It is the challenge you must face to truly understand the flame inside you. The fire is not just creation. It is destruction too. It is the spark that gives birth to worlds, and the spark that burns them away. You must learn to ride the storm, not fight it. A sudden gust of wind ripped through the clearing, sending the flames around him spinning in a frenzy. The fire's light bent and twisted in impossible directions, its heat rising to an almost unbearable intensity. It was no longer a source of comfort. It was wild, untamable, reflecting the storm that now raged inside him. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. The fire was him, and he could feel its chaos mirrored in the storm outside. The challenge before him was not just to control it, but to understand it, to embrace both its creation and its destruction. The storm was a part of him just as much as the fire. It was the raw, untamed force of life itself, full of contradiction, simultaneously giving and taking, creating and destroying, building and tearing down. He closed his eyes, taking a steadying breath. The world around him seemed to blur, the noise of the wind and the crackling of the fire blending into a single, overpowering sound. Inside him, the storm raged, but he remained still, centered, trying to find his place in the midst of the chaos. He could feel the fire within him, its energy pulsing, seeking release. But instead of fighting it, he embraced it, allowing the energy to move through him, to fill him, to become a part of his very being. The ground trembled again, and with it came a voice, not from the trees or the earth, but from within him. It was his own voice, yet it sounded like something much older, much deeper. I am both the storm and the calm, he whispered, his words barely audible over the wind. I am the fire, the creation, the destruction. I am the light and the shadow. And I will ride this storm not as an enemy but as a part of me. As if in response, the wind howled, the flames around him flaring up in an explosion of light, then calming, smoothing into a steady flame. Eli opened his eyes and saw the world around him change once more. The storm still raged, but it no longer felt like an overwhelming force to be conquered. It felt integrated, a part of him, a force he could move with, not against. The flames flickered but did not consume him. The storm howled but did not sweep him away. He was no longer just a traveler through this world. He was a creator, a force of nature moving with the currents of both light and shadow. The fire within him now felt like a tool, a choice, something to be used with purpose. The storm, too, was a part of him, and he could harness its power, not to destroy, but to forge. It was not the absence of chaos that he sought, it was the understanding of it, the ability to create within it. Eli took a step forward, his heart steady, his breath even. He no longer feared the storm. He had become the storm. The flames around him rose higher, their light casting long shadows across the ground. The wind picked up again, swirling around him, lifting his hair, carrying the scent of earth and fire. And in that moment, Eli understood. The fire was not just a force of destruction. It was a forge, a crucible in which he could shape his reality. The storm was not an enemy, but a test, a challenge to see if he could remain centered, if he could find purpose in the chaos. The world around him seemed to bow to him, the wind swirling around him like a living thing, the flames dancing in the air, the earth beneath him humming with life. The storm would rage, but he would ride it. The fire would burn, but he would shape it. This was his journey, one of constant creation, constant destruction, constant becoming. Eli turned toward the path ahead, the fire still burning brightly within him, the storm still howling in the distance. But now, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt empowered. The world was alive with possibility, and he was ready to face whatever came next. As Eli stepped away from the forge of will, The winds that had once felt like a tempest now felt like a distant whisper, retreating as he embraced the calm that followed the storm. The air around him still hummed with energy, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was as though the chaos had passed through him, leaving in its wake a deep, resonating stillness. The storm had been both a trial and a revelation. It had shown him the true depth of the power within him, and how, in order to wield it, he had to first understand its unpredictability. With each step he took, Eli felt a renewed connection to the world around him. The trees that had once seemed like distant sentinels now appeared as companions in his journey, rooted, grounded, yet reaching toward the sky in a harmonious balance. The earth beneath his feet felt alive with the memory of the storm, its vibrations still echoing through the soil, reminding him that creation and destruction were forever entwined. The path before him stretched out once more, the forest now open and vast. The rain that had once begun as a soft drizzle had ceased, leaving behind the crisp scent of wet earth and the occasional drip of water falling from the leaves above. The night sky, which had been shrouded in clouds, was now revealing its stars, bright, ancient, eternal. Eli paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. The stars seemed to pulse with the same rhythm he felt within his own heart, a connection that went beyond time, beyond space. He understood now that this was not just a journey of self-discovery. This was a journey through the fabric of existence itself, a path that led through the very heart of creation. The fire, the storm, the earth, all of it was a reflection of his inner landscape. But now, the storm had passed, and he was left with the stillness of clarity, a sense of purpose that guided him like the stars above. As he continued walking, he noticed a change in the landscape. The trees were thinning out, and the forest began to give way to a vast, open plain. The path stretched out before him, cutting through the tall grass like a ribbon of possibility. In the distance, he could see a figure standing at the edge of the horizon, silhouetted against the dimming light of the sky. It was distant, barely visible, but the figure seemed to beckon him forward. Eli's heart skipped a beat. The figure felt familiar, almost as though he had seen it before, but in a different time, a different place. The pull to approach it was irresistible, and without thinking, he began to walk faster, his feet moving with purpose. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer, and Eli's heart pounded harder in his chest. It was not just a person. It was him. The figure before him was a reflection of himself, yet something was different. The man standing there was clothed in radiant light, his form glowing with an inner fire that seemed to shimmer and pulse with the energy of the universe itself. His eyes were filled with the same fire that burned within Eli, but they also held a quiet wisdom, a depth of understanding that transcended time. As Eli approached the figure, he stopped. He didn't need to speak. The figure seemed to recognize him, to know who he was, and with a gentle movement, the figure raised a hand toward him. "You have come far, Eli," the figure said, its voice deep, resonant, and full of warmth. "You have faced the storm and embraced the fire within you. You have forged your will, and now, you must understand the essence of it." Eli's breath caught in his throat. There was something ancient in the figure's presence, something that went beyond the boundaries of time, beyond the boundaries of the physical world. It was as though this being had always been there, waiting for him, guiding him from afar. "Who are you?" Eli asked, his voice hoarse with the weight of the journey he had just completed. "What is this place?" The figure smiled, a serene and knowing smile that held both compassion and an ancient sorrow. "I am a reflection of you," the figure said softly. "I am the part of you that has always existed, the part of you that has guided you through this journey, the part of you that has known the true path all along. This place is the space between worlds, between moments. It is the place where creation begins, where every choice is made, and where all possibilities converge." Eli's mind swirled with questions, but there was no need for more words. He understood. The figure was not separate from him. It was a manifestation of his own potential, his own future, and his own deepest truths. It was the part of him that had already crossed the threshold, that had already walked through the fire and the storm. It was the part of him that had always known what he was capable of becoming. "You have seen the power within you," the figure continued. "But now you must understand that the true power is not in what you can create, but in how you choose to create. The fire is not the end. It is the beginning of an infinite cycle, a cycle that continues, always returning, always creating anew. You are the flame. You are the storm. You are the earth and the sky. But most of all, you are the choice." Eli felt a deep stirring within him as the figure's words settled into his soul. The journey had not been about finding the right answer, the right path, the right way. It had been about realizing that the power to shape his world, to shape his destiny, had always been his. The fire had been both a gift and a test, but it was not the fire that was important. It was the choices he made with it, the way he would use it to create, to destroy, to transform. The journey never truly ends, the figure said, stepping forward and placing a hand on Eli's chest. It is an eternal cycle of becoming, of choosing, of creating. The fire inside you will burn and the storm will come. But in each moment you will choose what it will be. You are not bound by fate. You are the creator of your own path. The moment the figure touched his chest, Eli felt a surge of energy, a brilliant, radiant light that filled him completely. It was the same fire he had felt before, but now it was different. It was not just his own. It was the fire of the universe, the fire of all creation. It was the spark that began everything, and the spark that would continue forever. The figure stepped back, its form beginning to fade, but its presence remained with Eli, like a part of him that could never be lost. "Go forward, Eli," the figure whispered, its voice like the wind in the trees. "The fire is yours. The choice is yours. Create with it wisely and let it guide you." And with that, the figure vanished, leaving Eli standing alone in the vast, open plain, the fire within him now a steady, guiding light. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time Eli was not afraid. He knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the fire in his heart and the wisdom of the storm in his soul. He was both the creator and the created. He was the flame, the storm, and the stillness that came after. The journey, it seemed, was only just beginning.